Good evening, all. Sorry, we're a minute or so late tonight. I just found out that a friend of mine's got a Discord server, and I got a bit distracted on it and realised I hadn't got a drink for this stream and had to run away and get one. The friend in question, my old Geek logo with the map, old school map thing that's on my channel. He's the guy who made that, and just popped by and said hello to him. Anyway, how are we all? I am joined tonight by Saxius. Hello, Saxius.
Hello.
And Elfbait.
Hey, folks.
So, hello, Elfbait. The drink of choice. It was a bit of a rush job, so it's blackcurrant. It's nothing interesting. Nothing interesting at all. Right. So what are we talking about tonight? First things first, I'm going to say hello to people who are in chat. Doof is already insulting Saxius. Saxius is a redacted. Yeah, okay. Halakar, if the best part of Wednesday is listening to us waffle on live, you need to get some beer in your life.
Might I advise getting out more?
Yeah. We can say that about all of us, can't you? I mean, we all need to get out a bit more.
I'm sitting in my basement talking to you, so...
Yeah. Hello, Omen Owl. Hello, Major's Musings. I've been watching your videos again this week. There's Doof again. And hello to Slan as well. So, good evening. Good evening. I hope you're all keeping rather marvellously well. Before we get into the topic, have you had any gaming in the last week since I've last seen you?
Yeah.
A bit of gaming, is that a bit of gaming? Or a lot of gaming?
Well, 2 games every weekend is a standard for my taste. And then once a month, I've got my real life game. We finally organized for next month, and we've got 2 weeks in a row, including the dinner with Curse of Strahd, where we will be meeting at a pub, have a private room where we will have dinner together properly for the entire thing. So full immersion. And I think 4 out of my 5 players have now decided that they also want to dress up for that day. So I'm going to have to dress up as well. It's just mandatory. Peer pressure is one.
I've done that. I've done the dressing up thing once, and it was for running the original Ravenloft. And it was Halloween. And so I did quite enjoy answering the door dressed as Strahd.
Never dressed up for D&D. I used to do historical reenactment stuff, but
that's taking it a step further.
Back when a parent would let a 13-year-old cross state lines with only a 17-year-old in charge.
My excuse was it was Halloween. We'd got my mum showed me how to make Halloween eyeballs. And what we used to do is we used to get some very, very runny red jello, as you call it in America. Get some lychees, cut up some grapes, and push the grapes in so they're like pupils in the lychees. Then you float the lychees in the bright red jelly, and as you pluck them out, the runny jelly redness goes into all the veins of the lychee. So it looks like an eyeball. So I was walking to the door dressed as Strahd, and I'd be there going, "Greetings, children. Would you like an eyeball?" And I had great fun scaring 4-year-olds that day.
If you wanted to be particularly mean, you should replace the grapes with cocktail olives, so it totally ruins the flavor profile when they try to eat it.
Well, they wouldn't eat them. It was me eating them. Eating them.
Okay.
Unsurprisingly, none of the kids tried them. I mean, and the older kids saw through it straight away, obviously. But
You gotta
was
say,
possible,
Zach,
but-
just 2 games in one weekend. That's a lot of game back to
That's-
back.
That's every weekend. That's
Yeah,
my standard.
I had to cancel my Monday game. I wasn't feeling well, but
Fair enough.
so no gaming for me this week. But
I ran the Lost City online on Monday using my toughened up version of 5th edition, which first edition people would approve. The party's fighter got raised from the dead using a raised dead scroll, and it cost him a point of constitution, as it should.
Nice.
Because that's the way it should be done.
No.
But they're about to go beneath the Lost City into all the new lower levels that Goodman Games have provided for it. So we'll see how they run. I'll hope to be able to discuss that on a video at some point to see how well those levels work. There wasn't much fighting.
That's the one thing I really like about the Goodman Games stuff is they are expanding on all of the further adventure options that the original modules had. Even with Keep on the Borderlands, they did. Yeah, they detailed some of the locations that are on the map, but not really given much. But they do a good job.
Yeah, and that's part of the point of those Goodman Games books. I mean, there was so much stuff in them, and I mean, there's probably too much stuff almost in the Lost City, and I'm trying to run as much of it as possible. But it's massive. It's playing online for 3 or 4 hours a week. There's over a year's worth of stuff in that one book.
Yeah, and now they're getting to the bigger ones where they're doing multiple tomes, like they did with Temple of Elemental Evil.
Yeah, I've backed the Dark Tower, so I'm looking forward to see how that turns out, because I never had the original Dark Tower. I've heard so many good things about it. I've read things about it. But I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out.
Wanted to grab it, wasn't in the budget.
It wasn't really in my budget, but I saw it and I wanted it. And yeah, well, okay. Anyway, on to our topic tonight. Let's see. Anyone else joined chat and said hello that I can say hello to? No. Omen Owl, I've backed the 5e version because my local group are more likely to want to play it that way. I don't own any DCC books. I keep meaning to, but they know 5e, and I don't mind it when I'm running it with my tweaked rules because it makes it feel more down to earth. Anyhow, we're going to talk about niche protection.
Yes.
Aren't we?
Indeed.
Have you been preparing?
Yeah. Like,
What? Well, no. I aim that at Elfbait because to be honest, Elfbait I think is quite a lot like me in terms of preparation. If it happens at all, will be a few scribbled notes. Am I right?
Yeah, and most of those notes are scribbled on my brain directly. Nowhere else.
I am surrounded by absolute savages.
Yeah, you
Yes.
literally are, because there's one either side of you.
Yeah.
Roll for initiative. It's
We're not using flanking rules. You're lucky.
Oh, good. But do we have a weapon speed modifier?
Well, I'm fighting with my bare hands.
I have a hot cup of coffee.
Glasses.
I have a hot cup of coffee, scalding damage. I don't know.
All right, so that'll be what, like thrown weapon?
I guess so.
Improvised free points.
I would use the oil flask rules for a hot cup of coffee.
There we go.
Yeah, that's still the quickest. Anyways, now niche protection.
Yes.
Why do we need to protect the niches of the classes? That is the conversation for today.
Or do we need to? How has niche protection changed throughout editions of games? Does it exist anymore? Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? All the topics, all the things we can talk about regarding niche protection.
Where do we
Absolutely.
start?
You've prepared, Sax. You say, off you go. Come on.
All right, niche protections. Effectively, the whole conversation stems from when we had back in the original sets in the AD&D games, even before then, in the homes and the basics, we were seeing that each class was having their own niche. Each one had their role. Each one had their contributions. Each one had their strengths. Each one had their weaknesses. Everyone brought something to the table, and that was a sort of a uniformed sense that you as a team, as a group, you would then be relying on one another to cover each other's backs, to lift each other up when you fell down, and to have each other's sixes, so to speak. Niche is the thing that makes you stand out. It is what gives you your, if we're using your story gaming terms, your moment in the spotlight, your thing to stand out, the thing that makes your character sing and stand out compared to everyone else. Because what this thing is, this niche, it is for you, and it is for you almost exclusively. And that is where it originated from. It allows everyone to have something when they come to the tables, from the thieves and their, well, using modern day terminology, they're monkey skilled, monkey skills. It's just, they are all over the place. They've got all sorts of contributions that you can have, from finding the traps to disarming the traps, their acrobatics, their pickpockets, their abilities to think outside the box, especially if you've got creative players who will make use of the talents and abilities of the thieves, from all the way over to the clerics and the paladins. And each of them have got their own thing that they bring out there and shine with. Paladins, especially if you start looking at the social impact that you will be having from having, in the old days, 17 in charisma. Good God, you are going to be someone that is going to be liked and respected right off the bat. And it's an important thing. Even so, if you've got DMs who then account for clerics and the importance of religion in typical societies, especially world-like gods and deities and pantheons, and you are going to be someone that's going to be assisting in that. I can go on for each class, but that is the picture I'm trying to paint here. Has times changed? It has. But that's something we're going to get into a little bit later.
It is something we're going to get into, yes.
Yes, but the main thing is that everyone has a niche, and it's something that has been there from the very get-go. And it's something that I believe, at the very least, is still something that should be continued in modern day gamings. Although the lines are blurred a bit more, it's something that I think it's there. It's there for a reason. It's there for not just mechanical purposes. It's also there for the social dynamic purposes. And I'll end my rant here.
All right.
Well, go on then.
As I say, I'll pick up right there. I think he makes a very important point that niche protection is good for the game part of the equation, especially. I mean, we're all sitting down to play a game, and having those roles make sure that everybody at the table definitely has a play. They have a role to play in the enjoyment of that game. You see it a lot. I mean, conversation always seems to come around to 5th edition, but it started earlier than then. I'd say about 3rd edition, where classes started to overlap more, and you started getting skill piling, where it used to be that if you were going to search for secret doors, right, that almost always fell to your elf or maybe your thief or whatever, and everybody would just defer to that. Now it's everybody has just as much of a chance to find something within plus or minus a couple of points, and so everybody's jumping on those. There's been a continual erosion of niches since 3rd edition, I would say, probably even starting as early as 2nd edition, where we had skills, non-weapon proficiencies and kits that would overlap some.
Yeah, you've just taken out one of my points I've got here straight away, in that I've got here that, yes, the shift seemed to begin with a bit of a movement towards characters having stories. And that was, yes, it came in towards the end. The story side of things really came in towards the end of 1st edition, but it was backed up mechanically in later second edition. As you've already mentioned, the player's options books, they brought in the idea of building a character. You had, in second edition, even things like specialist priests. You could have priests that could now use better weapons because they were devotees of a god of war. So they starting to, even though priests or clerics, as we called them in first edition, already did do a bit of the fighting, it was pushing them a little bit more towards the fighting. And as you mentioned, kits. There are various kits in those books where classes can be made to feel a lot more like other classes and have abilities that can overlap. And yes, I mean, I think the floodgates opened in third edition when you had all the skills
and
came
feats
in.
And feats really helped with that a lot too. And prestige classes.
Yeah. But that was my bit about how I felt about the sort of the history of the niche protection, because very much, I mean, in my video on the Player's Handbook, I read out a bit from the Player's Handbook where Gygax was talking about the idea of each character, players preparing to do their role in the game, and it's up to the players to piece together a party in order to succeed, not so much for the DM to create an adventure to suit the players. And it was up to the players to fill those niches and put together. And to me, that is the definition of player agency in a mechanical way. Okay, players aren't always able to make their own choices regarding what character they want to play because they have to work as a team, make sure that all the bases are covered. But it's up to the group as a whole to put together a workable party, and give everyone a role in that party. And their success or failure largely depends on how they put their party together and how they fill all of the niches. And unfortunately, I think with the movement towards play whatever you want, be whatever you want, all characters can do a bit of everything, we've lost a bit of that side of the game. And I think it's had a detrimental effect on teamwork. I think it's players are thinking more about their own character and their own game rather than the team. I've certainly noticed teamwork. I almost have to push teamwork on some of my groups.
Yeah.
To force them to work as a team.
I very much remember having to do that planning when you saw a room or you got a clue. It's like, okay, we're gonna have the fighters go in and then they're gonna do this and the magic user's gonna do that. And I mean, there's something to be said for the fun and the challenge of playing in an unbalanced party where you don't have all of the niches.
Yes, of course. I mean, the all cleric party could probably be quite successful, certainly at low levels.
Well, especially with clerics, considering they can fight worth a damn. So.
Yeah.
And funny enough, I feel like niche protection is still kind of alive and well of all places in video games.
Yeah.
A lot of multiplayer games, you can't generalize and be any good. And so it encourages that specialization, which also just kind of by its own nature creates that niche, the niche protection.
And that's a good thing, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. What's funny is I've had to beat my head against the counter argument plenty of times in 5th edition. I've had a cleric who didn't want a cleric. He's like, I want to make a cleric character, but I don't want to be I don't want to be the guy healing the party all the time. I'm like, that's kind of in your job description. I get that you want to play your character to a certain, and that goes back to what you're saying about playing to a certain story. He had a vibe and an idea for his character that he wanted, and that's cool. But at the end of the day,
I favor clerics protecting rather than healing. I think prevention is better than cure. But
yeah,
but they've still got a role to play. The cleric is very much like a party guardian, a party protector.
A cleric is really a combat medic. He shouldn't really be up there fighting, but he can fight if he needs to.
Yeah.
He can still be wearing plate armor, carrying a shield and a mace, and bashing his way through goblins to get to the downed paladin.
His job is to keep the rest of the party fighting. It is to keep them protected. It is to keep them going. Their point is exactly like you said, combat medic. It's you have to keep going. Whether that is patching you together just enough so that you have got a good arm that can still swing against the enemy, or making sure that the person over there does not bleed out, because it's going to be hell trying to carry their deadbeat weights, out of the event. If they're at least somewhat conscious, you have got an easier chance getting them out of there, and probably at a quicker pace. And you also risk fewer people, being out there. But that's a part of the whole niche protection. If we're going to go back to it, is that you're going to have a role, and that's going to be down to. If we're going to use the video game analogy here, each class is a role, and then you've got some of the other classes, like the rangers, for example, having more of a mismatch between fighter, thief, and a little bit of cleric in there once they get high enough level. But let's stick with the core three. Fighter, thief, priest, cleric, magic user. The four big ones. Those are the main ones you want, and you want to be able to cover each other enough. But you don't just want 4 characters. You want to be able to have a little bit more meat to the bones. Being a skeleton is nice and all, but it doesn't take much more than a hammer to knock you down. Because once the fighter is down, and that means it's the cleric that's going to be holding the gates, and that's not going to look pretty. So, as a group, it's vitally important that you sit down. As a group, again, the DM should have minimal input to this, because this is where the players are setting the tone for their game. This is what they want to experience, because they're now actively choosing their own setting almost. Because now they're going to be saying, okay, how many fighters are we going to go for? We're going to have these types of fighters. Good. How are we going to have anyone that's going to be skill orientated? How do we have any thieves? Okay, you're going to go for that. Okay, so what are you going to be focusing on? Assuming it's not first edition where your abilities are already pre-selected.
Yeah, I feel like some of the erosion of niches comes from D&D itself. The basic concessions, kind of default concessions in a lot of the classes as they were written in older editions, immediately created arguments. And I remember discussions away from the table, but like, why can't my cleric use a sword? Why can't my, why is it that not everybody can climb walls like a thief and stuff like that? And so I think over time, those arguments have been looked at by designers and said, why can't they? Why is it that only thieves have this ability to climb? Shouldn't that be a skill now? Shouldn't clerics be able to take whatever weapons? I think initially with like specialist priests, it was based on their god. Yeah. And then later on, they're just like, let's cut out the specialist priest and just make that basically the current version of a cleric is the old specialist priest with domains and everything like that.
I feel they're trying to keep everybody involved all of the time.
Exactly, and that's part of the old editions also, which I don't think is as bad as it was, and that goes back to that whole mythology about what the perception of the old game is versus what it actually was. I think there's this idea that when people weren't doing stuff back then, they were just sitting around doing nothing, and that's not anything that anybody wants. What people forget about in that equation is that the time spent waiting in an old edition was so much shorter than it is now.
Oh yeah,
because you had a very short list of things you could do, and you were done.
The mechanics generally resolved very quickly.
Yeah, you're not looking down your character sheet going, okay, I'm going to make my attack, but I have extra attacks at level blah blah blah, so I get to do another attack. I have a bonus action. My class feature does this and allows me to do this. You're not going down this list every turn, which makes a non-spellcaster character is as complicated and time-consuming to play as a spellcaster was back in the day. That's what the big complaint about playing wizards and clerics and stuff was. I have to sit there and think about what spell to use. Now, granted, of course, at low levels, you only had like 3, so, so you're not having to make too big of. But
I think got to open my window. Just bear with me.
I just think that D&D did it to itself and to a certain degree by opening itself up for those discussions, and they're not wrong, but I think in a lot of theory crafting discussions, they forget the practical aspects and the game aspects of the game.
I completely agree with you, and you're spot on, right? They were asking, back in those days, why can't my character do this? Why is it only the thief that can climb the wall? I've got a much significantly higher strength. I should be able to hold on this, and so on and so on. And it was addressed later on, where they decided that, okay, everyone except for the thief has got a base percentage of blah, and so on.
About 40%, I think.
It was 40. Spot on, right? It was 40% in order to sort of accommodate for the whole thing. They'll be going up and down depending on what you were. But again, they were still trying to protect the niche of the thief being the number one, because when they were discussing the walls, they weren't discussing slopes. They were discussing, 90 degrees.
To the point where they even went to describing it as like an almost supernatural ability for the thief to climb.
Yes.
Yeah,
and that's how they preserved it.
Exactly. And then things changed. Once we moved into, first developed into second edition. Second edition had its own little weird mix where you had skills and powers and all these other supplement books that were there for the game, that if you wanted to have that, which that's down to preference. But then you move into, for example, third edition, and that's where you saw a very radical shift from what we know, which is that it's class oriented. Your class is going to be giving a lot of dictation towards your contributions. Now it became more skill oriented about who can have what. You could be a fighter, but you could still be putting points into skills that technically belonged more to the thief. It would just cost you more, but you could do it. Yeah. And because if you had the right stats, and again, third edition 3.5 Pathfinder, you're looking at big numbers. These things can quickly sort of even out to the point where you are competent enough to do it without you being, a hindrance. And you can see some rather crazy setups with that, but that was because they decided to, once you wanted to make their own thing, and they decided that, okay, we're going to take what they had in second edition and in the later books and in the players' options, they were a lot more focused towards giving the skills, giving the abilities, giving the direct say to the players. So mechanically, they then handed it over to the players to start crafting what they wanted, which was eroding it down. It wasn't completely separating it, but it was definitely blurring the lines when it came to immediate skills and immediate contributions to the game.
Yeah, I know in 5th edition, for example, right now, my wife's character started as a fighter with subclass and then some feats. She's quickly becoming a backup spellcaster for the party because of the magical abilities that she's gained through her feats and her subclass. So it's very easy, and actually it kind of feeds into Halakar's point here. You kind of have to.
I always like the idea of filling those gaps with multi-class characters. Okay, they weren't as good at the specific thing in general as a specialist, but they at least did a job. And smaller groups should think about using multi-class characters almost more than single-class characters. But he's right in the way that he says that the more generalized characters have come from smaller gaming groups. I know, even looking back to the 80s, if we got more than 4 or 5 of us together, that was a shock.
I think we averaged maybe 4 or 5. Yeah.
I mean, my groups now are bigger than I got in the 80s. I ran a game online on Monday. I was DM for 5 players. And that playing online, that keeps you busy. It keeps you very busy if you've got 5 people talking, 5 players and a DM. and it tends to go off track a fair bit, but that's what happens. I would love to sit around a table and run a game for a group of 8 players. I'd see it as a challenge, but I would really like to experience that feeling. But it's something I've never had, because being in Britain, it saying with the word niche, it was a niche hobby. So we just didn't get the opportunity to play with the big groups. But yes, Halakar is. I think Halakar is right here, and also getting them to get henchmen could be like pulling teeth at times. I know
we never did it.
I tried to get them to get henchmen.
I'm well, when it comes to henchmen, at least with my current 2nd edition group, it's not that they're actively going out for getting the henchmen. It's just that my players do things that I just look at and go, this is going to attract people. So henchmen or hirelings or followers, call them what you want. You've got people showing up going like, I'm going to follow you. They found
I've done the same.
Yeah, my group found statues of people who had been turned to stone, brought them back. Turned out it was people who was petrified by a cockatrice, and they brought them back to life. Some of them have been gone for 200-300 years, and they now looked and went, oh God, I've got nothing to return home to. Do you mind if I stick around? Because I literally have got no bearing of the world. And here they are. They've got people literally working on in their manor who are saved adventurers. Anyways, back to the niche.
Yeah, I mean, I've used NPCs, henchmen, who are tagging along to try and fill those gaps as well. If I feel they're going to need something more, I might throw somebody along who will offer to come along with them. It's up to them whether they take them or not. But I mean, going back to the whole niche thing, I mean, the idea of the game was that it was a test of the players. It was a test of the players' ability to work as a group, which I don't think it pushes so much nowadays. The old fail to prepare to fail idea that filling your niches was part of preparing. The thing I've got here is, I mean, coming back to 5th edition, part of the problem is the shift towards bounded accuracy. I know the numbers were getting out of control in 3rd and 4th edition, but if you shrink the numbers and bind the accuracy levels and combine it with a sort of a skill system, that has largely erased the idea of niches. There's not a massive difference. For example, I've got a character on a Monday night who's got a high dexterity. He's not got proficiency in many thief-related abilities, but because he's got a high dexterity, he can do those thief-related abilities pretty much as well as most thieves, because the numbers are so tight.
What we are seeing in 5th edition is that because we are there's almost like a focus towards just like by the core, magic is such a big thing. So that means that magic uses are prevalent. You know, mechanically, it's very difficult to get away and more towards a lower fantasy game, purely because it is the entire game is marinated in magic and fantasy and so on. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but observing it means that when you're looking at the wizard and the cleric, if we were to compare to like 1st edition or 2nd edition, they were very special classes. You know, they were very, powerful in their own entities.
They were kind of the advanced character class for players too, in a lot of ways.
In many ways, absolutely.
Yeah, because they took a little bit more doing. Yeah, and in 5th edition, with all of the subclasses, just about every class can fill the role of a spellcaster at some point. And not even the ones that are built as what they as half casters, like paladins and rangers. You can now, like I mentioned with my wife's character, you can take a fighter and turn them into a source of spell power.
With the spell, you can have feats that allow basic spell casting, can't you? You can add them to almost any character.
And subclasses that do Mayo, like the Hex Blades and Rune Knight, which is what my wife does, and stuff like that. So it's there's lots of options. I mean, it's cool. The thing is, I don't want to bag on it too much, because it also makes for a fun way to play D&D. If you want like a higher fantasy, higher energy, higher power type of thing with a lot of high fantasy stuff going on. But like Zach just was saying, it's near impossible to play low magic kind of darker fantasy, kind of grittier fantasy with 5e. Yeah. Whereas that's just kind of the default written into the system for older versions.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they were looking at that as is. I mean, just one of the experiences I had when I, at a job of mine, I invited all my coworkers to actually try out D&D so that they could see what I was ranting and raving about after every weekend, so that they could finally get a chance for it. And everyone had a lot of fun, except one of the girls, who said she didn't like the fact that everyone except for her fighter had magic, and she was stuck just fighting along. So there was a different form of expectation when it came to
play Battle Masters.
Yeah. Oh god, yeah. I would love Battle Masters. I'd be such a menace. Just running there, you can do all these things.
Back in the day when I would try to explain D&D to people, in the 80s and stuff, I would use the niches sort of the way to explain it, like, how to, what do I play would be a question, what kind of I'm like, all right, I'm like, think about it this way. D&D is like Monopoly, but in the case of D&D, the dog does certain things, the race car does certain things, the thimble does certain things. And so, and I think very much D&D was written where the classes were game pieces that you were picking, because it was a game. They really did think about it more like a game back then. You can see, based on the concept of challenge and how defeat was an expectation in the game, losing a battle was not a bad thing. That was like, sorry, kind of go back to start,
Yep.
And then you whipped out a new character, and you wrote a poem about the death of your last one, bequeathed his stuff to the other player in the party because you were smart enough to write a will. But
ceremonially burn the character sheet, and off you go again with a new one.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. You all cracked open a round of Coca-Colas and poured one out for the fallen thief. But
it was always the thief, though, wasn't it? It was all at low levels. It was always.
We had a thief, if I can go on a tangent here. We had a player who loved thieves back in the day, and he would always insist on on 2 shares of treasure. Because when they would agree to the breakup of the treasure in the party, he's like, I am putting out way more risk than the rest of the party. I'm the one who has to disarm the traps. I'm the one who has to find the traps. I'm the one you want to listen at the door, scout ahead. I demand 2 shares. And
I only have a 15% chance of moving silently, and yet you force me to go ahead and try and be quiet.
And you want me to go ahead and face all the danger before you do, even though the best I can wear is studded leather.
Not even that.
That's true.
Not even that. Well, when you came to Unearthed Arcana, you could use other armor types, but yeah. Omanal says here, the first thing I do in any game is ask, what does the group need? I have done the same sort of thing in the past. I'm quite happy to play pretty much anything. Certainly if I'm the last one into a group, then the first thing I'll say is, what are the gaps in the party?
Yeah, but that's also the signs of a different way of playing, because you're looking at what does the group has as a whole, where some players come in and say, what do I want to do? And then they look individually. Some people come in and go like, oh, you're playing this. I want to play this because I see roleplay opportunity. For example, the wizard and the cleric always bickering back and forth about where does the magic actually come from.
That's the shift from a team focus to a personal focus, though, isn't it?
It depends on what you come in with the mindsets, but you're not going to have, well, it's rare that you're going to have an entire group of people who all shows up and goes, oh boy, guys, what are we going to do? Who's going to be playing this? You're going to cover that? Oh, great. So you're going to cover that, this, and then they just all sign it out. That's rare. You're always going to have someone who comes in and goes like, here's what I want. Here's my dedicated idea. Here's what I'm playing. I don't care what the stats are. I'm going to play this thing and damn be it, because in my head I've got something that I want to play. And
I expect you always play paladins. Always play paladins. And you'd say, I'm playing a paladin. I'm going to keep rolling until I get a paladin, and that means you all can't be evil. But we played at his house, so we all had to give in. anyhow. But yes, it is. I think I'm not overly enamored with the shift towards a more independent, a more individual focused style of play.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think it slows the game down.
Yeah, I find that I'm going to use 5th edition here. I'm just going to use the general culture that we've seen with the 5th edition games. When I approach such games from the DM's perspective, I have all intention that I want all players to have fun, both as a group but also as an individual, and that's very important. I want the individual to feel that they've contributed to the game. I want the group to feel that they've accomplished something overall, and I want to feel that everyone has been immersed into the world. Now, the last one I can at the very least do very well, because I just find ways to pull people in with my voice and just say things that just makes them think that they're in control, then not in control, then in danger, then out of danger, and back and forth. What often then becomes the difficult part is to give the chance for the individual to stand out. Using my Curse of Strahd group as an example, we have got everyone in the entire group is now a spellcaster. Everyone, we've got a bard, a sorcerer warlock, a paladin warlock, a thief warlock, and a fighter sorcerer. Everyone can be casting spells. Oh, we've got a bard as well. So everyone's casting spells. It's all over the place. So making magic very special for the individual person, I really have to make sure that I am thinking carefully at what I am telling. For example, the warlock and the paladin warlock, I have to make sure that whenever it comes with any form of magic or the likes, I have to specially make sure that it is almost divine. It is based around her goddess. It's based around this and that, so on and so on. And I've got to make sure that this is being done for every single person, because everyone wants to jump in and kind of contribute the moment they find out that they can do something to do with magic or investigate magic. I have to keep it in perspective of what they see from their background, from their niche little thing. So whether it's the warlock who's decided that, hey, you know what, Cthulhu's a good guy, let's give it in for the deep one, or I
do want to come to Call of Cthulhu in a moment, but yes.
or you've got the sorcerer who has taken a warlock pact with the Fae, and then something that's going to be very different, because you're looking at the magic from a very different point of view. You're looking at it from emotional, but also from the very strange and almost surreal colorings that you'll be seeing from the world of the Fae. And then you've just got the pure sorcerer who is looking at it from both the emotional point of view, but also from, well, you've got to take account for his warrior aspect of how he would almost be trained to look at magic as a very martial aspect, and how it would be applied, and so on. It puts a different form of emphasis on the DM to bring the niches out under such circumstances, because
which is just more work for the DM.
It is more work, and in my case, I'm up for it, because this is how I keep my edges sharp, and I stay on my toes.
It's just like I still appreciate alignment. I'm not a hard alignmentist, but I think alignment was good for one thing, and that was shorthand for
it's
where
a moral
somebody.
compass.
It's a shorthand. Class is like a shorthand,
Yeah.
and I mean, things that I wish they still had in monster descriptions, for example, that they got rid of. I mean, frequency was so useful for me as a DM.
Yep.
If something was common, I would generally assume that the players knew just about everything about it.
Of course,
because it was all over the place. Uncommon, if it wasn't all over the place, it was probably storied. But even like rarer things, I would. Hey,
depends how iconic the monster.
Yeah, like
is,
they're probably going to know about dragons, but that always comes down to what's real and stuff. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. It's just like the shorthand elements of the old game. A lot of the old game was very much codified for the gameplay to be a shorthand. So where there may not have been a lot of nuance built into it, but the core of the game had some very decent hard concessions that made it quicker and easier to play, I think. And that's where the niche comes in too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I see so much time is wasted at the table trying to figure out who has the best opportunity to do what. Even if it's searching for a secret door or listening at a door, I will often have my 5th edition players going around who has the highest proficiency, who has the this, the that. Can I help him? Can I do a help action? And that just didn't exist.
And the game is meant to be more story based now, and in essence, that type of behavior at the table makes things feel more mechanical, and less natural.
Kind of ironic.
I just want to say hello to a few people in chat, because as usual, I am terrible at keeping up with chat. I'm about halfway down it at the moment in terms of flicking down it. So a few people have joined us. Michael Stronghold. Hello, Michael. All right, DM James. Nice to see you here. Innocent Smith is with us as well. At this point, they're still talking about climb walls at the bit I'm reading in chat at the moment. So that's how far back I am. If anyone in chat has got a channel, let me know and I'll shout it out. I know DM James has got a channel. I know Mage's Musings has got a channel. So check them out. I'm just scrolling down a bit more. I will go back and read all of these. Hello, John Cartwright. Oscar Hernandez. I don't think I've seen you in my chats before. Welcome. Just scrolling down. There we go. I think I'm towards the bottom. If I haven't said hello to you, I do apologize. I'm not very good at this chat thing. I have this sort of tunnel vision focus thing, and when people are talking,
you're a man, John. You can't multitask.
Yeah. I'm a man with a wonky brain, so that makes it even harder to multitask. Right. Somebody mentioned Cthulhu.
Yes.
Somebody in chat has mentioned about skill-based games having niches as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very much the case in Call of Cthulhu.
Mm-hmm.
But
too many generalists will get you killed in Call of Cthulhu.
Oh, yes. If you spread your points out over your skills very, very thinly, then you're going to die. But I have found that some of the less balanced parties have been some of the more entertaining ones to run. In general, in most Call of Cthulhu adventures, you are most likely to succeed if you manage to try and balance observant type skills, intellectual type skills, and physical and practical type skills and have specialists in each. So you've got your ex-army guy, your journalist, your professor, and that's sort of your stereotypical group. But I will say that I've had a lot of fun running games for parties with no physical types, where they're all having to use brain skills and deduction skills, and to me that makes the players, and it's more like a party of all thieves and magic users in D&D, though in Cthulhu it's a bit more workable because it's less combat focused. But I thoroughly enjoyed running one particular adventure where none of them could fire a gun. None of them even had a gun. think the best weapon any of them had got is they picked up a stone from the beach.
Yeah, one of my players in my group has been carrying around a shotgun he took off of a murdered cop for the longest time. So, it's like,
and I say one of the least interesting Call of Cthulhu games I've had, although it might be down to the adventure being a bit linear, was when all the party members were in the army. So, okay, you're all very similar and you're all quite physical. So you're just going to fight everything. And that's really not what Call of Cthulhu is all about.
Yeah, I think I looked out with my group because most of them have a veteran background because we used the experienced characters option where you had you get some extra points for your previous career before you started. And my wife's character and two of the four players all took veteran backgrounds, but they played them very differently. Like one guy's a newsman now, and another guy is a mechanic, and my wife's character is actually she's a fortune teller because she was traumatized by being a nurse during the war and just went back to her family business of being a fortune teller. So, and I think Call of Cthulhu, while yes there are niches, I think they sort of evolve organically rather than being. I think if players are looking at who their character is, especially if you're playing something a little bit more grounded in the real world, like the 20s, 30s, or modern, it's really easy to sit there and say, well, my character's a software engineer, so he has zero physical ability, and not just I'm poking fun. I know plenty of guys who can outlift me, no problem, and can code like a demon, but it's really easy to build those characters, and when they build them based on who they are, not what they are, then what they are just tends to fill a niche anyways.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you can have some, but that's the players almost like they build their own little cosmos around those characters as well, and they help get that both the statistics to help them out, but then the way that they then have to engage with each other and try to find ways to make use of their things, their own established niches. That can be a lot of fun. I mean, if we're staying on the topic of Call of Cthulhu, I had a very short campaign where I got to play, and I decided that I'm going to be an insurance man who has an absolute obsession about finding houses that you can flip. So the best way to flip a house is to find the one that's got a murder in it, or the one that's got a ghost.
That's an awesome idea. I love that.
So my character, and it just came out sort of naturally. It's just like I came out like, here's what I am, here's what he's gonna do, bam, bam, bam. So I told the DM, this is because I want us to have an easy way for us to go to the next adventure or go to the next place, so that he doesn't have to worry about that. It's just me phoning up the detective, going like, I need you to investigate this place. It's like, Krasinski, please. There are better things. I've got more important cases. I'll double the rate. Just get it over here.
I love my buddy's character, who's the news guy. He used to be a legitimate reporter, but he kept writing about weird stuff too much, so they fired him. And he's got a detective who's on the outs with the department as a contact. So there's a place to get adventures, but also he has a PO box for his rag that he writes, in the 20s that we're playing. So he gets all these things stuffed into his mailbox all the time. Like, I saw a dude with a fish face down on the docks, or that new gambling parlor down in the seedy district. There's some weird stuff going on in the basement.
Yeah, but again, to the point of like Call of Cthulhu, you build the niche for your character, and that way, you as a team, you find ways to work to the strengths of each character, and then from there, you develop your own weird shenanigans for how these things are meant to be going out and about. And to me, it's hilarious because you can end up with situations like that or situations like mine.
It is because Call of Cthulhu is a lot more about the plot, the story, which is often baked in, but I find that characters, if a party is designed in a certain way, adventures can play out so differently to a party that's designed in a different way.
Mhm.
There was we say about organic character development. The adventures themselves will develop organically based on what the characters' fields are and what they're good at, and which leads they will follow and how they will try and follow them based on the characters' specialities. And that's, so I suppose that's what sort of thing I was getting at when I said I really enjoyed this one particular adventure. It was, what was it? An Amaranthine Desire. It was. It's played with a group of pre-gens, and I gave out. I didn't have a big enough group to use all the pre-gens, so the ones that I gave out to play were all the non-combatant types. So my players immediately were not thinking about doing anything with force. They were trying to use smarts for everything, and that made the adventure so much more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We should do an episode on Call of Cthulhu.
yeah.
At this stage, yeah, horror done right.
We always keep coming back to it. So
it's just a great game.
Systematically, it knows exactly what it wants. It knows exactly what it wants. It's got the mechanics to back it up, and H.P. Lovecraft has got some fantastic literature, and
his contemporaries. I mean, all over the place too. So you know, it's just good stuff. And I was about to mention it. I mean, like something to be said for the niche of the game itself. You know, the expectations you have when you come to the table. For example, when people come to the table for D&D, they're generally, I mean, your mileage may vary, not all that willing or ready to engage in a lot of heavy, multiple session spanning investigative work. I mean, you can pull that off, but at a certain point, the fighter's going to want to fight something, or the thief's going to want to steal something, or whatever. But with Call of Cthulhu, I've spent sessions and, you know, spending like 3-4 hours a session, up to 12 hours, just doing the background work. You know, the not me, but the players, you know, doing the footwork to try and get a leg up or figure out what's going on. And it's been fun. It's been NPCs left and right. And, you know, that's just, you know, I think you know, when you're talking about niches, you know, there's your game's core expectations is going to generate a lot of that too.
Yeah. So. Go on.
No, okay, you're going to say something.
Well, yeah. Sticking to the whole niche protections, settings are going to have a very big impact to that as well. So with D&D, you've got the preset of, you know, you're going in for fantasy. There's going to be adventuring. We're either going to go out fighting, you know, we're going to do Lord of the Rings shit. That sort of, you know, grand adventures, epic tales. Call of Cthulhu, it's going to be, you know, psychological. It's going to be horror. It's going to be, you know, a lot of legwork. There's going to be a lot of, you know, you got to, you know, work together for these things. Go into games like Warhammer 40,000, and people are just going like, oh boy, my character can lose a foot if I get shot. It's going to be fun. And so on. You know, you're looking at just very wild expectations, and the niches that are going to be coming with it are going to vary quite dramatically when you go around from them. I mean, having a balanced group in a game like Warhammer 40,000 Dark Heresy, where you are literally just the spies of the God Emperor's Most Holy Inquisition, you are gonna need a lot of players for that if you want to be quote unquote balanced, because you're gonna need the brainiac. You're gonna need several people who can not only be up in the front to kick ass, but they can also take punches back like nothing else. You need specialists for when you're dealing with machinations. You need specialists for dealing with social events. You need, you know, oh god, what else do you've got? You've got people who are going to have to deal with the scoundrels, deal with the law, deal with nobility. There are so many things you're going to have to account for, and you're not going to have them all. So as a group, you almost have to preset, you know, what are we going to be doing? What is our capabilities? What are the niche that our team can accomplish, and then what are the niches within that niche that is going to allow us to accomplish that? It's a pre-setup you almost have to do, and mix and do. Go on.
I think I agree with you. Like, there with any game, you're going to have that. I mean, Star Wars RPGs, whichever set of rules you're doing, you've got to have at least one guy who's a really good pilot. Much to my chagrin, you're almost always going to have one or more people who want to play the freaking Jedi. You're going to have some guy who wants to play a bounty hunter, but there is a lot of overlap in that universe. But then again, it's such a soft universe that it doesn't require too hard of a niche protection. I mean, face it, Luke and Han were both really good pilots. Chewbacca was also a really good pilot.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, R2-D2 by the evidence of the movies was a really good pilot. So,
I mean, even then, like if you take for example, Stars Without Number, and there is 3 classes. You've got the psychic, you've got the fighter or the warrior, and then you've got the specialist. And 2 of them are going to pigeonhole you in for what you're going to be, and then you've got the third one that is going to be basically whatever else you need to fill in for the team.
And then there's me, who makes the used spaceship salesman.
Please, I made an accountant.
My my second character was Joe Benjabi, starship salesman extraordinaire, and he would every time he'd run into an NPC, he'd be like, "Hi, I'm Joe Benjabi, starship salesman extraordinaire. Yeah, can I interest you in a ride?"
Yeah.
I'd say hello, Omanal. Omanal's joining.
Hello, Omanal.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm just trying to get off work, and then I always like hearing these things about everyone talk about niches and D&D. You can tell it was intended, which gave a really good forced teamwork. I hate to say, is it really forced that teamwork initially? Whereas like Call of Cthulhu or other skill-based games, players really need to make sure that they excel at one skill, and then and they don't overlap on that basis. But you can't just be a minor generalist. So you might want someone that can do the backup when your pilot gets shot, that at least he knows how to land the plane.
Yeah. I think we were just saying, I mean, Call of Cthulhu does have its niches, and one thing I do like. I mean, have you? I know you've just finished work or whatever. Have you been on the last 15 minutes listening to what we were saying? Or
I have. Yes,
you have. So yeah, you say you're aware that we're talking about Call of Cthulhu and how the composition of the party can really guide the adventure. But yes, you do need certain characters that can do certain core skills. If you've got nobody who is remotely observant, you're in trouble from the start, because spot hidden is used a hell of a lot in most Call of Cthulhu adventures. Certainly,
I think as a GM, you also need to sit down with your characters and say, "Hey, look, this is what an adventure is going to be. I'm going to need someone to get a couple of these skills." Unfortunately, with Call of Cthulhu, that isn't too hard. Oh, I'll put some points over there and bump it up. And so, but that's where the GM, and I know everyone hates this word of the session zero, but to me, that's the generation for all of these characters. And just like you were talking about the rogue trader, yeah, you don't want everyone being the psyker. You don't want everyone doing this. It removes a lot of the focus on characters as well as the player. Nothing's worse than sitting back and saying, "Well, I can't really do anything because everyone's better."
Exactly. I mean, for me, when I hear the term session zero, I'm not interested in talking about things that are off limits and things that trigger people or anything like that. I want the players to sit down together and make their characters together and create a party that can work together. And if they need any information from me as DM as to what might be useful, I'm happy to offer a few clues along the way. For example, if you're playing Horror on the Orient Express, I would say, well, you are traveling across Europe, so think about the sort of skills you might need to use when traveling across different countries, which is a big hint to say, have somebody in the party who can speak a variety of languages.
I will not speak the language of the frogs. How dare you, sir?
Yeah, I always bank on my players' characters' involvement in the Great War and having been in Europe as ways to get them into contact with people over there, across the sea too. I mean, especially considering we were playing in San Francisco instead of Lovecraft Country, so we're on the complete opposite side of the country.
Anyway, going back to a few comments, because as I've said, I need to appoint somebody as official comments person, because I am terrible at this. Innocent Smith said the idea of characters evolving is why I like the idea of prestige classes. And yeah, I like characters to evolve, but he's right, and he says that the execution is so poor that you have to plan everything out. And it took away a major part of the game for me. But I think we are going a little bit away from niche protection in this comment. But I just thought he made a good point and a reason why I dislike the 3.5.
Well, I think it watered down the niche protection by doing that. I understand you wanted a more rounded character, which is where D&D has a real problem. Is you're really pigeonholed and you are lacking a lot of things. Now, of course, the newer editions get better and better as you start adding more and more skills. But at the same point, you have eroded what made those classes so special. And I think that's the other problem that you get is now, what makes you so special there? Whereas I understand first edition, looking at the rules now, you looked at it and like the Druid was a secondary or even tertiary character. They were not the primary focus. The Paladin Ranger could substitute for a fighter. And that's the problem that I had with those two classes, was it really displaced the fighter. And those are sometimes where we get into it, is looking at it and saying, I don't mind third edition with their subclasses, which allows you to I can get this little sub niche, but I still think that they would have been better off from a gut feeling is to literally have the 4 classes and then make all those other ancillary classes like Ranger and Paladin and a lot of these others as a subclass for the fighter.
I'm you show how far back I am in chat. Going back to wizards, and you made a comment here. Wizards were to do mapping and the communication and the reading. Yes, of course, they were the ones with the languages. They were the ones who could read. How many of you have played games where, unless you specify otherwise, characters are illiterate, and the wizard is the one who is literate, and that is what makes them so useful and gives them their position in the party, as they're the ones that can go to deal with the sages. They are the ones that can consult libraries and get the information that is vital in the preparation phase of an adventure.
It was the old Conan thing. And the other part is that they would write down, like, okay, we fought such and such type of monster. This monster reacted this way. They were supposed to be more of the, how do I want to say it, is
the scholar or the
the
sage.
They were supposed to be the scholar or sage in the background, because you only had a couple of spells which were blown very quickly. And yet, if you came to the magic door or whatever, and it had all the ruins, just like whenever you have Gandalf that's sitting in front of Moria.
I was about to say, that's the wizard's job, is being Gandalf trying to open up the gate.
That's what I always want, and I agree with what Grumpy Old Slan just said here, is that the thieves had the read language skill, and I would have preferred that they had given the read languages skill to the wizard.
Yeah, I can see that.
I always thought that it was weird that wizards had to, like, that read magic was a spell.
I'm sort of torn on. I think Saxius was aching to say something about a minute ago.
No, it's completely slipped out my mind, so I don't remember now.
John says here, I agree with this comment, and I am being more and more drawn to BX. And there was a comment, I think you made it earlier, Owen, regarding niches even being covered by certain, and BX pushes that further. But sadly, my players aren't drawn to playing BX. So
what I think the problem. how do I want to put this? The illusion of variety makes you think that it's a better game in certain cases. Not always, but BX's simplicity has really narrowed it down, that you knew what everyone did, and it felt that way, and it sped the game along too. I mean, when a dragon only has 37 hit points, which doesn't sound like much, but that's one breath weapon and an entire TPK for the party. You're like, all right, we have to think this out. And I think that was one of the nice things, whereas that was one of the first things that shocked me with 5e. What do you mean wizards get a D6 hit points?
Yeah.
Now I understand why things are done for from a gameplay design. As a kid, I was like, oh, this is, I always want to play the wizard that can cast spells or then fights with the sword. I'm like, okay, I understand that. But I think that D&D really evolving from a war game where every unit had a specific thing. I don't care that if the pikemen could literally pick up a sword. They're pikemen. That was their job. And I think that's the same thing you see in BX in first edition, at least until they start getting into the Wilderness Survival Guide and the Dungeoneer's Guide and going from there.
DM James says he asks what the party needs and then rolls up a fighter. I think if you've got a low-level party, a fighter's always useful.
They're always useful.
No matter what.
Full stop.
Yeah. If in doubt, a party can survive quite easily with 4 fighters, 1 thief, 1 magic user, 1 cleric. Run in, bash a load of things, and run away. It's a simplistic way of playing sometimes, but it can be highly entertaining. Just be ready for a fair bit more combat.
Well, the funny thing is even when I play other systems, like I've played Cypher and a few others, and I even make a badass fighter, his first instinct is, we're going to talk this out. And if they're like, well, we're going to draw our swords, like, you understand this is not a good idea, is what I'll say to the NPCs. One of us is going to come out, and it's going to be me. I would suggest you put those back in there.
Yeah, it's like, the fighter's going to be the one who knows what's at risk when it comes down to crossing blades, so he may not necessarily want to fight every fight.
And Innocent Smith says, who needs a rogue when the barbarian can disarm everything with his face?
I have had that player in a group.
That was me.
Yes, that was you.
No. I'm not in your group, but I mean, that's what I've done.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Just battle rage to decide, like, I don't have time to wait for the thief. Just walk straight down the hallway and dunk. That's a 60-foot drop straight down, followed by hatches opening up, and there is now water being filled up in this pit.
Well,
there you go.
I think the other thing is that a lot of players are used to talking for a good 20 minutes on how to do something. Mm-hmm. And you need that one player that says, you have a choice, make a decision within a minute, or I'm going to go forward. And it forces players to keep the story going. I know that sounds funny. I'm not saying always. We're not talking about it. But that's what I'll do is I'll like, what does this lever do? And if someone says, well, I don't know, I'm saying, all right, I'm going to pull it. And they're like, whoa. Well, you don't know what it does until I pull it. We're going to pull it. but if they say, well, wait a minute, we have an idea that this is going to work, I'm like, okay, I'll wait back. But I want, as a player, you should also be pushing your group to move forward with the story and not be that paralysis of actions. You give them like, well, here's 100 things you can do, and players will sit there and not move. And like, well, you just need one person to say, all right, we're going to pick adventure Y. Like, why did you do that? Oh, I threw a dart on the board, and that's what we're going to do. Like, oh, okay. Now, if someone says, hey, I'd like to do this, then you go follow that. But
it's the old Han Solo boring conversation anyways.
Yeah. I've just noticed I'm beginning to have my traditional sort of between 10 and 10:30 internet wobbles. It always happens when my family all go to bed and all on their phones, so everyone's using the internet at the same time in the house. That's just a bit of then feel free to
discuss amongst ourselves.
another. Yes. To Jeb, who's joined us from Canada. Is that Raig Prime? I've not seen you before. Hello. Ranger Lemure is saying hello to us all. And I will need to read comments at some point. I'm just scrolling to the bottom at the moment. Chat have generally sort of followed along with what we've been talking about. So, yes, time to get ready to screen cap Geek's face. Yeah, just doing it. Do freeze frames, yeah, whatever you want to do. I don't care. I have absolutely no shame whatsoever. So, there you go. Take that one. Anyway, where were we before we interrupted with that? I've completely killed our
I think we went a little bit off tangent from the niches. So that's not entirely unusual. But in the topic of bringing it back into niches, we have been seeing, over the time that there's been a shift in the focus for the niches, for the abilities, for the skills, sort of shifting a little bit away, sort of going in a more of current editions more towards a more story orientation, with the niches being more towards how the group will be interacting. I do want to touch up on something that was mentioned at the very beginning of this, which is that I do believe that things like the skills, maybe not so much the backgrounds, but definitely skills can help flesh out a character and bring out some of the niche that a class can have. I'm going to be primarily picking at second edition because I think it was done very well in that edition, and I am absolutely biased and I don't care. So when it came to skills in second edition, you would of course have your proficiencies, so your job. You would have a job. You would be a fighter, and you could be stereotypical and say, I'm a blacksmith, or I'm a farmer, or I'm this and that, because I'm labor orientated. So you can have these things that you can roll up with, but then you would also have the specific skills or proficiencies that would then be coming for the class, and that was meant to be complementing the class, allowing you to have a bigger contribution to the group, anywhere from the fighter being able to do tracking, hunting, fire, building a fire, armor crafting, weaponsmithing, fletchery. These are all additional things that a fighter can then bring out, skills that will not only contribute to himself, maintaining his own equipment, but also contribute to the group, like tracking, especially when you don't roll up the stats to have a ranger. You need to have a backup. If you're able to track, if you're able to do forestry and the likes. And the kits then came in with that same idea, just a little bit more focused. Now, I'll be the first to agree that the kits were not meant to be balanced. Some of them are outright imbalanced, poorly play tested all the way through. But these things made your character not only more prominent with their niche for what they can assist with the group, but also made that you as a character, you had things that you could just quickly glance down and go, what can my character quickly do? What are the things that I can argue that my character is capable of? And that could be anywhere from, I know about both natural and unnatural animals that can be found in a forest because I'm a huntsman. I would need to know how I can tell apart a hawk's cry versus a griffin's cry, because you're going to need to know when to run for cover.
I think those skills were good as long as the player had a decent focus when choosing them, and had a good idea of what they wanted to create when choosing them. All too often, I saw players just simply pick the most useful ones, the ones that they saw as being the most useful. Whereas I would have always preferred to see them pick ones that were more interesting.
Yeah. Go
Can
on.
I bring up something? Because, if we go look at 5e, I like the Dungeon Master's Workshop where they have a background proficiency or personality trait proficiency. I think the problem that when you start looking at the additions is 1e at the beginning was kind of, you can see it's strong wargaming bent. The monsters had inches, for movement and everything else. But once you got the Dungeoneer Survival Guide, people thought that their skills were all that they were. Instead of saying, I am super, which really what they should mean is you're super specialized in these areas. And I think that's part of the problem that D&D has had ever since, is that all too often people look at it as a limitation of what they can do rather than as an expansion of what they can do. It's like, well, I don't have fire starting. And it's like, well, really, if you were going to do fire starting or healing, which to me, some of these things should have been there anyway. It's like, okay, instead of giving a healing proficiency, the healing proficiency will do these extra bonuses on top of it. But it's like, well, why will I bandage a character? It doesn't do any good. Whereas if you have the healing skill, it's like, oh, it heals 1 to 3. And it's, well, we really should be, and I understand 5e did that with some of the, which I'm not a huge fan of, is I get this kit, the healing kit or whatever. Oh, and now I have this proficiency. I don't like that aspect of 5e so much.
Especially considering you can buy kits.
Yes. Well, you buy a kit so you're proficient. Whereas I do like these options because it removes the limitations sometimes of what players are thinking of, is the background and personality trait proficiency in the Dungeon Master's Guide of page 264. Yeah. Is at that point, the players say, oh, I am a pirate. Okay, what did you learn to pirate? Well, I should know swimming. Yes, you should know swimming. And like, oh, okay, well, I know how to tie knots. That's fine. But if you go over and say, well, what about this? As a DM, I can say, no, you've overdone it. Oh, okay.
I got to the point where I've started telling my players, don't tell me what skill you want to use. Just tell me what you're going to do.
Yes.
And
that's something I try and push.
And so for my talking a lot about my wife's character today, for whatever reason it's on my brain, but her character is the daughter of the local innkeeper, and so there's a lot of really basic domestic cooking, fire starting, networking with people's skills that I just kind of assume that her character has without even having her to have to roll for them. It's only when it's a challenge that I'll have a roll, just like with the swimming thing that Omanal has mentioned. Sure, you're a pirate, you can probably swim, but are you like an Olympic level swimmer?
Yeah, and I think it is important to assume a baseline level of competency, and use those skills for situations that would be more difficult. Bit like the old climb walls. People have mentioned that, it doesn't mean climb slope. Anyone can attempt to climb a slope. It's that specific. It's a specific wall. So anyone can
or a rough stone wall that might as well be a ladder, right? Yeah.
yeah. Regarding fire starting, Grumpy Old Slan says, pretty much anyone could start a fire by the time of 8 or 9, but maybe not in a hurry.
Or out in the middle of the woods.
Or maybe, you'd have to have wood that was properly dry. Somebody who's got the the fire building ability would know how to build a fire in imperfect conditions. Would know what sort of wood to look for in locations where perfect kindling is not available, and that's where the skills should come to the fore.
Animal handling, yes, you know how to shoo the chickens away and make sure that the hog gets back to the pen and lead the donkey to market just by default, but you're not going to necessarily know how to wrangle a wild boar.
or train your dog to do impressive fetching tricks.
Exactly.
This is where I also think almost like the background of the character comes into play, because this is, again, just building on to niches. Absolutely, you absolutely should do. I'm going to be using my 2nd edition group here. I've got a character where he's a wizard. He's from an empire that has been described as just evil. very dangerous place, should not be there, but he's from there. He's got ties to nobility there, administrators from the royal courts, and he's out now in a foreign country, having gotten an education away from the empire, because if he got an education in the empire, he would be enslaved to the empire, and he would never escape from that. So he was granted freedom from his parents, but he's also, as far as he's concerned, considered exiled, even though the empire wants him back. We are now playing into the fact that he was raised in a sort of courtly environment. He was very early on warned what court life is like, what the life is, how you behave as a nobleman within a very dangerous and very high society. That was drilled into him very early on in his character's life, and we're using that background to explain why this character is able to navigate and engage with the higher society. It's only a baron and his court, but he's able to engage in that sort of social conflicts with much better ease than the elf in the party, who is coming from a more of a middle class merchant background. He's not used to the backstabby den of vipers environment that the nobleman is coming from. And the dwarf, who is he's a savage warrior. He's pretty much Bear Grylls, except he's rejecting society and embracing the cottage out in the woods. He doesn't even know how to properly shake a hand, let alone that he's meant to be bowing to everyone that's around him. These are backgrounds that I take into account whenever I'm trying to explain, when you enter into the room, how is your entrance, how is your engagement, how do you speak, and all of this forth to help bring out the immersion, because this is what the players decided to play. This is the uniqueness that they have. So the niche, go on.
No. I mean, I was just, since we're oddly morphing into skills and niches, I think part of the problem is that many of the skills that characters get, unless they get expertise, really don't separate them that much from other characters. At first level, you get what, +2, and you roll in a D20. And I would much rather, and I know that some other systems do this, is either you add I would rather a proficiency add an advantage on top of something, or something of that sort, where you can have a much better chance of success if you're skilled in something than if you aren't. I mean, if you have a DC of 10 and you get a +2, okay, you get an extra 10 or 15% chance to do something. But I think that's the other problem that you have, is that, at least for D&D, is that it hasn't separated those character classes as much as they used to. The thief did this. The warrior did this. The thief acrobat definitely could jump very far. Well, some of these things have disappeared in certain areas, but it would be nice to make a more clearly defined cut in certain areas where you can say, I can pick this niche wherever I'm going.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the comment on the bounded accuracy too, because with the bounded accuracy, those numbers just don't span as far and they don't mean as much. So your proficiency bonus, like you were saying, doesn't make you all that special.
My fix for that might be considered quite clumsy by some, but I quite frequently will only allow characters who have the proficiency in a skill to even try something.
Which gets us back again on that 1E aspect of what is your basic skill aspects for that. So, I mean, I think the problem is that D&D is dealing with trying to bridge a level-based system with the more modern skill-based systems. Yeah. And instead of really saying, okay, we understand that you can do this, and we're going to allow certain aspects in here. Or I would and I really like the World of Darkness aspects when you looked at skills. If any of you have actually looked at the skill list, it will say, fencing. I'm sorry, if you have melee, you took a fencing class for 6 weeks. Oh, this is going to be practice. This is going to be expert. This is going to be like a veteran or almost master. And then this is like 5 would be world renowned. And it makes a difference in understanding what players should do. And I wish that they had done more of that in D&D in certain cases, rather
they had more of that back in 3rd edition when the number span was much broader. when some of your difficulty, when some of your DCs could be upwards of 30, and stuff like that. So
that obviously created its own problems. So if you didn't keep up with the arms race, you quickly fell behind. But
yeah, which is why we ended up with bounded accuracy.
But that's also like, it's trying to create the scale, and it's the scale that sort of helps define who has got the niche, who does not have the niche, who is the amateur, who is the grandmaster, which is what Omenal is pointing out with in World of Darkness. You've got your skills, and for every point you've put in them, there is a significant change in just how skilled you are in them. Again,
but Omenal kind of put the finger on it though, when it's D&D is a non-skill based system trying to adapt to having skills, whereas Call of Cthulhu, Vampire, even the Star Wars systems are all built with skills into them, so that's just core to their mechanic. And so they already have that there, so you don't have to, you don't really have to tinker with it, and it fits more seamlessly because it was built there.
And I would rather, not that, and I know some people just love to roll dice. I'm not a huge fan of rolling dice all the time. I would rather say, I go search the drawer. Okay, I'm going to tell you what's in the drawer. There is no observation check. There is not doing all of this all of the time. Now, if it's something general, like I'm going to search the room, okay, let's do this, and let's see if I let you find the specific thing in there, if we're going to do this randomly. But I would, and then we're going to talk about 5e in particular, I would enjoy more if the classes had some just automatic aspects in certain areas. Or say, okay, they automatically succeed on anything that's a DC 15 or below once you hit this level. And then that would make a big difference, and then that could allow them to move forward. And I think the barbarians have that at what, 19th or 20th level, where they can just automatically say, oh, I automatically get this roll. But I wish more of them had that, and then you don't have to try to figure out every skill. It's like, oh, okay, because you either get skills that are worthless, like someone gets cooking, and I'm going to mention Palladium being one of the worst. You have all of these skills that seem to overlap, like mime. Who the hell's going to use mime? I don't need that as a skill. But then you have absolutely critical skills that you're going to need. And I said, you don't want skills that are not useful, but you also want skills that are taking for you. A perfect example is Forbidden Lands. Forbidden Lands has a fantastic skill system where every skill matters. Fishing matters. Cooking matters. As almost as much or more so in some cases than your combat ability. And I found that interesting.
I think it's time that we address Halikar's statement there.
I have not seen those classes used as much as I would like. I saw, I think Omenal replied, not liking Assassins as a PC. I see the Assassin as an opportunity as a DM to give the player of the Assassin something personal for them to work with.
I would say that there's a giant AAA video game franchise that proves that that's a valid PC class. So,
well, I'm going to bring that up. Is it good for having someone in a party? That's the difference. Is
I think it does depend on how you're playing the game. I mean, as I like to run classic adventure modules, but I do like to tinker around the edges, and I like to have an assassin in the party because it gives me an opportunity to play with the contents of the adventure, and that player character may well be being rewarded for bumping off somebody in the module in particular, and it gives the character a reason to be working with the party. Yes, I can understand that people might go, oh, ultimately they'll be working against the party, but I do try and make it so that the target of the assassination is something that will advance the adventure forward in the way that the party want it to be done.
I think that the assassin is a chance for players to play that anti-hero type character too. Yes, I'm a professional killer, but maybe there's a good reason for me to be doing that now, or maybe I'm turning those skills towards something else. I think popular media, whether that's books, comics, movies, TV, is full of that character, and having him,
James Bond,
having that on a character, a character sheet, and being able to play that. Yeah, I almost wonder if, for example, the guy who originally created the assassin was a fan of James Bond.
But to me, I would rather, and I think it's going to have to go back through it. I haven't really pulled up. I'll have to look through my OSC stuff on how they modified the assassin in there. But I do think that part of my feeling for some of these is I don't like, it's like having a paladin in there. You're kind of limiting on who can be what characters. And that's where I find, and again, in other game systems, God forbid, Shadowrun, that's about all that I kind of played, was that kind of character. It was just, all right, I have all the skills to kill someone from a long range if I want to.
Street Samurai.
Yeah, well, I always did I don't have to fight the Street Samurai. I just can shoot him from half a mile away.
Yeah.
And I think that there's that aspect. But I'm not against assassins per se. I just think there are better systems because D&D, at least in my mentality, has such a moral aspect to it, whether people realize it or not. It has such good versus evil that the more nuanced characters, I would rather them just play some other game system, oddly enough.
I guess going back to the topic of niche protection, though, a lot of those very specialized classes had very steep requirements to be able to play them. I can't remember if Assassin was one of them, but they, by that very nature, were protecting the niches because, you had to have the god stats to play them, until they modified that later on. But, initially, like to play a paladin, it was, 1 in a million die roll for your attributes.
It's also, sorry, go on.
Oh, good.
For me, when it comes to the niche, like Assassin is a niche class. It has a very niche thing to it. It's got a very niche mechanic that it can bring out and that it's trying to focus on. And that's often where, when I look at an assassin, the question to me really boils down to, is the campaign right for the class in this? Are we looking at, for example, a city adventure where having a group of players and then an assassin in amongst them, is that going to contribute on? Yeah, you can have, various jobs go here and there. You're going to work as an adventurer within the city to, blend in, lay low, get a little bit of money here and there, and then you're going to have a job, and then you're going to see if you can string the players along and get in some support for that. That's something that you can do for that. I found more fun with Illusionist because that's more of it's a school specialization, which we saw that wizards can, especially in 5e, they can become a specialized wizard in a specific school of magic. And I like Illusionists because illusions are a great deal of fun because it breeds out the whole thing of creativity, but it's a niche thing because you have to walk into an illusionist and be able to think with illusions and how you're going to be implementing them, and you gotta approach it with reason almost, even though you're dealing with optical illusions. I don't know. But
it is the realm of the ultra creative player.
Yes,
and has to be able to work with that player for the illusionist to work.
Yeah, like
the illusionist probably came around because somebody wanted to play a non-fireball-y magic user.
Yeah.
And we really was like, hey Gary, can we make this? Because I have this really cool idea, and I don't want to play the flashy wizard with all of the attack spells. I want to try and be more of a guile wizard. Yeah.
I had a player, he's still in my sanity group, and what he did was that throughout like a year, he observed how my world acts and reacts to various supernatural forces. And one of the things that I've always been making very clear is that every time there is like very dark and sinister magic, especially if it's necromantic, or if you're looking at the specific god or gods that are directly tied to evil gods. There's always a lingering sense of frost. The temperature drops. These hints of like anti-life matter is seen in the physical world. He made use of an illusion to make it look like an entity from the ground was rising up, and he was bringing out, frost. He was making it feel like, okay, the temperatures are now dropping. People can now see their breath before them, and these, icicles are being presented. So it gave the illusion that a dangerous and evil entity has just appeared and is now attacking the monsters. And it had every single sign that this is a real thing. The senses are telling me this is real, and my sights are confirming it's real. So it's time to run. That was purely because you go.
Go ahead.
I'll keep going. If you continue to talk about illusionists, I'll keep.
Oh, as I say, yeah. I mean, talking about experiences with illusionists. I mean, back in the day when I was a less restrained young player, we had me and another player both decided to make 2 different illusionist characters and went around with less than good alignments and started going around bilking towns out of money because we'd make a monster or convince them that the inn was haunted and then get rid of the ghost or get rid of the monster.
That's a great idea.
The DM, of course, got us back by having an actual werewolf show up in town once, and everybody was we got Boy Who Cried Wolf, because then they were like, it's just another illusion, and then the werewolf attacked the village, and then we had a village of werewolves in our campaign worlds.
I'm going to actually. I've seen David's comment, but I'm going to come back to it because I've just seen Dura Lumin mention an interesting thing about assassins. Renaming them to bounty hunters, and there was the bounty hunter kit in 2nd edition. And in 1st edition, I'm quite a stickler for the alignment things, but I can see in 2nd edition, the bounty hunter version of the rogue, the thief, was an interesting kit, especially flavor wise. I think it was quite a strong kit though, in terms of its abilities, but it was certainly one of the better kits in my opinion, and I think it did a good job of bringing the assassin archetype to a very playable form.
Yeah, I think a lot of character classes, if you're willing to like kind of sort of reskin them thematically, can play. The assassin, for example, it's a good version of what we were talking about earlier, like a fighter who doesn't like to fight but is really deadly in a fight. So like you could play your assassin as, look, I don't want to fight you, but if we have to fight, it's going to go really bad for you. I know my Battlemaster character in 5th edition, I took like a couple of levels. I dipped into Thief to get some of the basic Thief abilities, not to be thiefy, but to help simulate his agile swordsman build that I was doing, because there's some of the disengage things and stuff that a thief can do that really help that theme. I wasn't trying to be a thief, but ability-wise, it fit my character concept. And so, yeah, you're talking about the assassin getting reskinned as a bounty hunter. You definitely do that, because you can even give him that you can even have him have an ethic. You like you see in The Mandalorian, I can bring you in cold, or I can bring you in, I can bring you in warm. Which is it going to be?
It certainly brings in the more neutral alignments to that style of class. Anyway, I'm going to go back to David's comment up here. And yes, the Paladin and the Barbarian have the same sort of impact on the way a party needs to operate, as the Assassin can do. It does sort of constrain the other players into creating their characters in a certain way. I'm not a fan particularly of the Paladin, apart from the fact that it is sort of like the classic hero type character. It fits that sort of that hero mold if that's the type of game you want to play. I think that's why paladins were popular, because they are the Arthurian knight. They are the rescuing damsels in distress. It's what, when we were
Yeah, you could just replace
teenagers,
them with the
one of the
Cavalier
first
after Unearthed Arcana came out.
Yeah, yeah. One of the first fantasy type characters I'd imagine we all imagined ourselves playing would be the paladin type character. But Dave's also right in that the barbarian, the first edition version of the barbarian, was so difficult to get into parties and to work as per the rules, because it just stopped other players from playing any characters that were associated with magic, which was very frustrating. But yes, if you've got a game set in the wilds, very low magic, they were fine. But only in those
both of those rely on people being able to play with nuance, though. I mean,
Yeah.
and you know, and not just, you know, for example, you can't have the paladin who doesn't understand what alignment is and just plays lawful stupid all the time. And the barbarian, that whole superstition against magic, I think it was supposed to be it was written to sort of be, you know, Conan's curmudgeonly dislike of the supernatural. I don't think, but too many people who play barbarians made it like, I want to go punch the wizard in the face every time he casts light. You know, but you know, I don't think that was ever the intent. Again, it's a nuance thing. I think really you were supposed to be playing that classic barbarian, which at the time was basically Conan. Yeah, who eschewed all things magic.
And Mage's Musings says here, we had a player running an assassin in 1E who convinced the other players he was running a fighter. I tried to do that when I was 13, but they saw straight through it because I was a half orc wearing studded leather armor.
Yeah, they went even worse with that and I think I told this story of the horrible story of the Oriental Adventurers ninja. But yeah, your ninja could even lose honor, substantial honor, like lose all his honor and have to commit like seppuku in the Oriental Adventures if they were discovered to be a ninja. There was like a massive honor penalty. So they really doubled down on that whole assassin concept of having to conceal themselves. But
and I'm not against someone playing assassin. I just think it's one of those things that I don't. To me, like, we'll just play a fighter that has this, or that uses poison, or use a thief that has the backstab and let him use poison. It was part of the way that I was looking at it. You know, that's the way that I looked at it. It's like, if you really want to play an assassin, you don't have to always play evil or anything else, but that gives you the flexibility to still be in there. But then the real question is, okay, once you've done your assassin, and I'm looking at the 1E talking about assassins right now. And it reminds me very similar of druids and a few of these others. It is very limiting for the players, and and I'm going to not mention just this one, but for the other aspects of any character that takes, you know, like major enemy, you are dictating the entire campaign for the rest of the party, and that's where I think the problem is. An assassin coming in and leaving, I think, is fine, but from a campaign standpoint. You know, if you're going to do a one shot, fine, we'll put you in as the assassin. You have this thing in here, and then you can leave. But from a PC standpoint, I just don't like them for that very reason. Some of the things are too limiting for the group, and it's like, okay, that sounds nice, but D&D is a group game. It's not like some of these others we can play alone.
That is true. I mean, assassins, by their very nature as well, do probably suit. If you're going to run a group, a smaller group, very focused group, because, and especially if you play a half orc fighter assassin, then you've got quite a robust, very sort of utility character that is suitable for small groups.
And it's a prestige class. I mean, even though it gets 2 less levels for doing the stuff, it gets very similar aspects. You know, it says tertiary function is the same as thieves. Like, well, then why aren't you playing a thief? And that's where it comes down to sometimes with these niches. I haven't looked at BECME for the higher levels, but apparently they do have some of these, like a fighter could then become a prestige class after the fact. And I wish that they had done that more. And I know they do it in 5e, but it's such a low level at third level. All players do is just drool about getting that subclass. And instead of saying, okay, over time you can do this, and then you can branch out a little bit to get a little bit more niche, instead of saying, well, look at all these powers I get. So, but that's the way that I feel about the assassin in this case, is looking at it is like, okay, you're a third level. Or I'm sorry, once you're third level, you act as a first level thief. So,
I mean, that was a bit where the rules were a little vague. I always allowed assassins to have first level thieving abilities at first level, second level, and third level. And then at fourth level, then obviously there'd be a second level thief effectively. So otherwise, it was pretty impossible to hide as a thief at first and second level if you couldn't do any thieving skills.
Anyway, I'm going to have to jump out here, gentlemen. It's been a great chat as always. Yeah, we'll have a good
Thank
one.
you, Sanchez.
All right.
See you
well,
later,
good
man.
night.
Bye.
I'm trying to think of other, we've touched on the various things, and I think, but yeah, that's where D&D really is falling down. I think in some cases is sometimes playing in those niches really lets players be more creative in how they're going to do things. And sometimes the problem is that it gets too limiting. So, because I know as a kid, I always wanted this, but I want to play Conan that can do this, that can climb up walls and stuff. Well, now you got to take this level in fighter, and now you've got to do this, and now you've got to do that. And you're just going, but I want to be the best fighter. I just want to couple these skills, and that's where sometimes those things seem to hurt. But I also understand that if you're giving all these niches to everyone, then niches, but you're giving all these skills that allow them to do the exact same thing as every other class, you're playing the wrong game in a level-based game.
You are pretty much, yes. And Mage's Musings makes a point here that first edition was traditionally run as a troop idea, where you had a stable of characters you could rotate in and out as needed, and that's something that I never managed to pull off when I was younger, but I have more recently. And that comes back to the idea of the players picking and choosing their characters to make a party that's suitable for whatever the adventure is. And he's right in saying that having Assassin come and go in this sort of instance is quite workable.
I think that was easier back in the older editions when it took like 5 minutes to make a character. So.
Yeah. It still it only takes 5 minutes in 5e, to be honest. It's all the messing about with backstories that takes all the time, and I don't ask for backstories.
Equipment is what always took the longest. I don't care what game it is. Equipment is the worst thing in certain cases. Where most of the GMs I know is, if it makes sense, you have it. That's what they'll do.
Even before they had them in the versions of D&D with the equipment packs, I had in my gaming notebook some standard, basically calculations of equipment by class. Yeah. Like if I'm playing a fighter, this is what I'm taking, and I would write it down on my character sheet, and I already had the gold calculated. That way, I wasn't spending a bunch of time.
Backpack, wineskin, rations, 50-foot of rope. There you go. There's your fighter.
Exactly.
Well, now they have the Explorers pack, I think, in 5e, which includes
they have the Adventurers pack, Explorers pack, which are good shorthands. I like those.
I do too. I like the idea with. I just wish, when you can do a class basis, these are all the equipment that you get, and later on, when you go to the store, you can buy the rest.
Although there was one dumb one. What is it? The Scribe's kit or whatever. I can't remember. The more like the kit that's designed for the wizard. Right?
The Scholar Pack, yeah.
Scholar Pack doesn't have a candle in it. Like, what? We're looking like, why doesn't it have a candle? I mean, 90% of the time, if you're sitting there at a desk or in a dungeon writing something, you're going to be doing it probably by candlelight, right? You're not going to have somebody blazing a torch or holding their lantern over your shoulder.
And speaking of which, cantrips have really removed some of the need for certain skills.
Yes, completely. Mage Hand is just wrecked.
You want to talk? That spell alone slows gameplay down so much. I don't know how many times I have to either answer questions about whether somebody can do something with Mage Hand or not, or correct somebody who's using Mage Hand. No, you cannot have your Mage Hand operate the crossbow that you have pointed the opposite direction down the hallway.
Yes.
But it says it can lift this amount. I'm like, yes, it doesn't say it has any manual dexterity. It's just, yeah.
Well, the spell that I hated because I saw players do this was mend. This is broken. We'll just do mend, and you're like, well, look at all these broken items. I'll just mend them. And I went,
yeah, but mend mend is another thing like Mage Hand though. It's like you so much time spent. You're like, no, that's more than the the dimensions that mend can do or whatever.
Well, but mend. The other problem I have with mend is that they just spammed the spell. I'm like, no, that's the problem that I have with so much of this is I would rather players say I have a limited number of cantrips. And when they say, well, it breaks like a chain link or 2 halves of broken key. I would rather players have to sit there and say, okay, you tell me how you're going to fix this key and don't use just mend automatically to get around a lot of stuff. That's the way that I look at some of these. It's not that I disagree with the idea of it, but I would really like to see a lot more, I want to say, thoughtful innovation on trying to get past traps and things than just relying on the magic. Like, oh, okay, no big deal. And I understand why they did it is, oh, I get into a fight. Well, my cloak is torn. Oh, I'm just going to mend it. Okay, that's cool, but I hate saying this. 5e has gone way too Harry Potter.
Well, and like Goodberry.
Yes.
I mean that one. I mean, I think a lot of the cantrip. It's Goodberry cantrip first level.
It's not no, but it's still.
It's yeah. I can't remember. It's one of those things that again, it's one of my big boogeymen. Gets rid of all the survival aspects of the game. You don't need rations anymore.
and you kind of invalidate the point of the ranger.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's the point that I have with
niche protection.
That's the whole point of some of these is I want them to have niche protection or it to be significant enough that it's not used all the time. Which is like I don't mind the spell knock. A lot of players will not necessarily do that. I'm like, oh, okay, we'll let the thief do it, but I would much rather them say, well, this works until you get to the anti-magic shell, or certain things get in there, or the fact that knock basically wakes everyone up in the entire dungeon.
Alarm is a cool spell, but boy does it wreck encounters.
Mage's Musings says here, with the way I read the AD&D book, it was typically Gygaxian vagueness, and I it's probably why I fall back on the Osric one as a way of clarifying rather than doing something different. But it's one of those things where you can read the assassin in the original book in a number of ways. He wasn't clear. And provisioning and equipment is the first and best part of the adventure. I think it is as well. I like it. I just wish more players would think about what they're going to be taking along, what they're going to spend 10 minutes outfitting themselves beforehand and actually put some thought into it.
This is where, I mean, I'm trying to think like Forbidden Lands in this case, where they kind of do it, except that you do it by dice rolls. So instead of you taking, every time you say, well, you're going to eat a ration, you roll the die. And if it's over a certain amount, you lose that, then your provision goes down by 1 die roll. So you might start, like you say, well, we're going to load up on food. Okay, that's a D12.
Who does Forbidden Lands again?
Free League.
Yeah, that's a Free League thing, though, because they did that with Alien, too. With the Aliens game, where rather than get you bogged down in ammo counting and stuff, you just do threshold rolls.
And Conan does something similar with loads. It's like, well, you can keep shooting until you do one action or you get a complication, then you lose a load. I like that aspect of, as a DM, I don't have to make sure the players are being honest, and I don't have to do all the paperwork either.
One I don't know if any of you've played the Adventures in Middle Earth 5th edition adaptation.
I've looked at the travel rules.
That's the bit I'm gonna come to regarding character niches, because there were 4 roles that had to be undertaken on each journey, and they had one character had to be assigned to each of the roles.
That's taken from Forbidden Lands.
Is that where they pinched it from?
Yes.
Well, no, because Middle Earth was around well before Forbidden Lands was.
Yeah, but this is the new one. This is the One Ring, right?
No, this is Adventures in Middle Earth.
It was the pared down 5e.
Oh,
yes,
that they did. Actually, a really good 5e to play if you want to play a grittier 5e.
Yeah. There it is. It's actually a very nice adaptation.
Low magic, survivalist.
Yeah, completely. And in order to undertake a journey successfully, you had to have 4 different characters, each roll against a certain skill, and depending on how well they did on that roll would affect how the journey went and would affect the entire group as a whole. And it made the characters think about how they compose the players think about how they compose the party beforehand, which is good as far as I'm concerned.
I agree.
It's also super easy to lift and put into 5e because it's written for 5e.
I haven't seen that book, and I don't know which one came out first, because I'm familiar with Forbidden Lands on that.
Adventures in Middle Earth came out not too long after 5th edition. It was one of the very first licensed 5th edition setting games.
I think it was about 2015.
Okay, so that actually predates the Forbidden Lands, because I did the exact same thing. One person would be the scout, one person would do this, one person, and it was kind of intended. To be fair, Forbidden Lands is a much more hex crawling game for that, where you really do need those niches. And the guy who can cook may be worth more than the guy who can fight with his sword, and that's why I liked that.
I will go back and say that I'm pretty sure that those roles are talked about at least thematically in like an older version of D&D. I'm trying to remember if it's BX or if it's in the DMG somewhere.
Wilderness Survival. I think Wilderness Survival Guide had it.
But I would imagine Forbidden Lands probably pinched it from Middle Earth, because Middle Earth is kind of touted as the go-to by anybody who's talking about how to make journeys interesting. If you watch any video on how to make travel interesting, they refer back to Middle Earth.
And it was proof that the 5e system could be adapted well to a different setting.
Yeah.
And that magic could be stripped out and the game could still be very playable, very enjoyable.
Yeah, there are a lot of 5e worlds that have made them more deadly or stripped, kind of even keeping the high fantasy, but just making things more deadly. Like there's a couple that have gotten rid of death saves, but are still 5e, and there are some that they have death saves plus, like the one of the common ones you hear is like, if you fail a death save or you succeed on a death save, I should say, when you come back, you're still like under a level of exhaustion or something like that, because there is a death spiral.
I use the exhaustion aspect.
It's such a great mechanic, but 5e just avoids it like the plague.
Yeah. I like exhaustion because some things I didn't see as much with the players, but sometimes all it takes is one player to abuse something, like, all right, because you're doing this, you have a choice, either stop or I'm going to have to do something like that. And I agree with you on the exhaustion, because I was listening online so much for it. I said, no, we're not going to do this bouncing up and down. And like I said, I've been trying to get a group. I just need to find a place to play, unfortunately, because I don't want to play online. But it's because, well, everyone has wives and stuff like that. So they're like, well, my wife doesn't want people over here at this time. Like, we'll bring food. She doesn't even have to cook. I mean, we have fajitas. We'll bring in barbecue. I mean, you just sit back and we'll do the rest of it. I mean, full meals. That's what I did last.
Are you willing to commute to St. Louis? I have a spare bedroom.
Go
Major Musings mentions mending here. Yeah, think about a world where so many people could just spam mending. If every apprentice wizard in a world could spam mending, you would never need a large number of traditional professions. It would change the world irrevocably.
I'm trying to look through here for
some of the. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was just trying to look for the 1E stuff on. Because I have all these books open. I'm like, let me pull this book out, so I'll wander off and grab something while you guys are talking.
I will say a lot of the cantrips make a lot of sense in. Not I not even in the Harry Potter kind of sense, but also in sort of the Wizard's Apprentice kind of magical world sort of a concept. I mean, I could very much see the Master Wizard telling his apprentice, "Hey, I blew out my cauldron. Have it mended by the morning," and he's like looking up his little cantrip for mending, and and doing that kind of stuff. I can see that, but with the default world of 5e, for example, being the Forgotten Realms, where there are literally like magic shops, and if you ever remember, was it Ambrel's catalog of all things, where they basically had Magic Amazon. That was a great supplement because there was an equipment guide that was done like a Sears catalog in newsprint and stuff. It was done for AD&D or second edition, can't remember. It's not a 5th edition thing, but like, in that world, she could magically get you your order anywhere in the world, basically. So you could order from her. But like you said, in those settings, then if you have this kind of quickly available service, you're right. Why is not the fantasy world some utopia of magic? And so I think those types of spells are great. And cantrips may have actually made sense back in the grittier origins of AD&D, where your wizard character might be the only wizard, for 3 counties.
Well, and that's how Forgotten Realms used to be, and that's the problem. Is it's the power. I want to say power creep, but it's actually like almost exponential.
It's setting creep.
yeah. Well, the setting has made it so it's almost ridiculous, and that's fine if you're playing a Harry Potter style game. And the reason I mentioned Harry Potter style is just they were casting all these things. I wouldn't, but magic is way too common, and it's funny because it says we designed the characters without them having magic weapons. I'm like, sure you did.
I think it's just the gaming style. It's also immediate nowadays, and people play in shorter sessions and expect. They don't expect all the. Well, we're talking about the outfitting bit. If you're told of most 5th edition groups that they're going to spend the first 15 minutes of each session outfitting their characters for an adventure, they'd be like, "I don't want to play this. I just want to blast."
Yeah, that's why they have the equipment kits, the equipment packs.
Yeah.
And I don't have problems with that for the provisioning aspect.
Then there's me though, who's going down the list, going, "Okay, I'm going to have 3 candles and." I'm gonna have 10 torches, and I'll have 15 iron spikes. I don't need 20.
Well, you know what? I did the exact same thing. Well, how much does this weigh for encumbrance? I remember being, I guess it was 9 years old, and I was spending all my time trying to make sure that I was under the encumbrance and everything, which made strength. Strength was much more important in 1E because of that reason. Was if there was one niche that anything that the fighter had is you're going to be carrying most of the gold and other crap.
The other hirelings, which we never did.
The other character who do a lot of the carrying would be the magic user, because unless they were carrying
nothing else to do.
yeah.
Although I gotta say, it's occurred to me, if you want to talk about the ultimate infringement on niches, it's got to be the Cavalier. Because the Cavalier comes in and says, "I am a better fighter than the fighter, but I'm also a really cool non-restricted knight archetype." So I'm niche blocking the niche blocking paladin.
Oh no! The paladin became the Cavalier, if you remember. The paladin
they were still in the same. It did not replace the paladin.
No. The Cavalier. No, the paladin became a subclass of the Cavalier. If you look back.
Yes.
In which edition, though? Because Because in Unearthed Arcana, you can start out straight as a cavalier. I did it
but
multiple times.
in first edition of Unearthed Arcana, what they did is they moved the paladin to become a subclass of cavalier. I allowed both. No one ever rolled good enough.
We're talking about we're talking about the second edition.
No, first edition.
Okay.
First edition, and the problem was that then they started allowing, and they tried to fix it, even though we all screwed with it. Was the specialization rules? That was the problem with all too often. I think with a lot of these character classes is they're not designed from the ground up to truly be independent. You know, like, well, we'll just add something cool here. We'll add something cool here, and that's sometimes where I feel the bad thing about the fighter was the battle master. All of his maneuvers should just be a default for having a fighter.
I think I mentioned that in one of the comments in the section. I firmly believe that the battle master is the prototype for the fighter in the next iteration of D&D. I think that I know that it was taken from 4th edition, but I really feel like the battle master takes the fighter and puts him on a similar playing field as spellcasting characters by giving him a number of options that he can do in fighting. Because one of the constant complaints about fighters is that they just hit things. They just are piles of hit points and they swing swords or axes or whatever. The battle master really changes that. It gives him area control, gives him bonuses, and he gives him buffs and debuffs and things. So he becomes a more active character class, much like the other players who have stuff to do. You know, it's kind of funny because in 5th edition, the fighter's sort of where the wizard was.
Well, and speaking, go ahead. Sorry, John.
I think some of that is. I guess they may have had some complaints or some worries about people thinking the champion was boring mechanically. I don't know. Anyway, what you just say, Manal?
I was looking at when we're talking about niches. Let's go a little bit beyond classes here, which is the niches that, like, who was mapping in 1E. You know, I always thought that was going to be your wizard. It's always yeah, I mean, whoever can write or something is,
or maybe your ranger.
Well, you know, that's why rangers I felt were always more outdoors. Which, to be honest, as I went through 1E, it was dungeons, and then we started doing everything outdoors. It's like, well, you can go into the cave if you want, but most of them. I like the openness that allowed them to maneuver. I could do dragons and everything else.
I have to jump in with a story about do you want to go into the cave? So 2nd edition, of course, also saw the dawn of monsters as playable races, right?
Yes, the Humanoid's Handbook, yes.
I had a player who had managed to get his previous 2 characters killed, like, just by playing stupid, which are fun stories in and of themselves. But he then pestered me while the campaign was already in play and while the players were on their way to the next to an adventure to let him play a Firbolg character. Firbolgs, they're giants, right? You know, they're giant kin, and yes, they can eventually get small like people, but not at first level. So the rest of the party shows up at the cave in the woods. And they all go into the cave in the woods, and he's stuck out there for the whole adventure because he can't get in the woods. And he's like, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm like, you're the dude who just pestered me for 2 weeks to let you play this giant character. You're playing that giant character. You're guarding the entrance while.
Well, and I think the other part is, and this is what I've mentioned repeatedly, is I think, you know, if you look at the old modules, the expectation was 6 to 8 players. And if you have 6 to 8 players, most people had the primary and the backup. So your cleric, you could have the healing cleric who still fought. I mean, whether people like it or not, when you start looking at the cleric still hit better than the thief. They were a fighting class with their armor and everything else. And
they're always intended to be.
Yeah, and their front line, just like the warrior or the fighter is. They're intended to take that damage.
And it makes sense because they're the combat medic. They're supposed to be right there.
Well,
side by side with the fighter.
But this is where I'm coming back into, and this is where you get some of the specialty classes, which are your druids and stuff like that. Yes, I need my combat medic, but now I can do something else. But by having 2 of each one, same thing with the illusionist in certain ways. So the illusionist a lot of them do other things, is if you have two magic users, one can be your combat and one can be your utility. And then the same thing with the cleric. Is the cleric, one can be your medic combat aspect, healer, or in some cases they don't even have to do it, like resurrection. Like, look, we'll just carry his dead body out, and then we'll worry about that. But then the other one is you also got your what I hate the modern term, but you know, the ones that buff and debuff your opponents.
It's convenient, you know, ways to describe stuff. I mean, your assassin fits right in there too, because in a party you could have a thief and then a slightly more killy thief who's also a backup thief. You know?
I just didn't like. I mean, even looking at the old Dungeon Masters guys, when you start looking at the assassin, it's intended to go for one target, and that's where he's intended to make his mind. That's the problem that I have with it. Is it just feels too.
It's the theme of the class, not so much the mechanics of the class.
There is a lot of the mechanics. We get a certain percentage to kill, depending on the level difference. You know,
I tend to see the multi-class characters as the backups in each role as much as possible. And I think that's the sort of role they should fill. If you've got a higher level mage who's capable of blowing things up, and you've got a fighter mage who's a slightly lower level, then in terms of putting a party together, it makes sense to me to have the higher level mage doing the heavier work with the spells, and have the utility coming from the fighter mage, because the fighter mage can also take part in combat as well. So,
and they're lower level anyway. So what are they going to do with those spells? Though to be fair, in 1E, you know, fireball. Well, it keeps on going up by a D6 every level. I said, well, which was one of the things I did agree that they did with the later editions, is to cap damage for those low level spells, because it made Meteor Swarm almost irrelevant.
Yeah, certainly, yeah. And like saying about the thief, like, you have your specialist thief, and a fighter thief is a perfectly serviceable character in combat. So that's your thief who he can back up with a few thieving abilities, but he can also stand there with the fighters, though clearly not as much, but he's got the ability to contribute a lot more in direct combat.
I liked them in the old first edition, which is that they were supposed to sneak out and they're supposed to find everything. Then they come back to the party and tell them, and then the party would make the plan. And then after they'd make the plan, is okay, you thieves, we aren't going to see you until combat starts. And then they would start backstabbing people. And that was the way that I always looked at it.
The classic elven fighter thief or halfling fighter thief. Very, very useful addition to any party because of their racial abilities as well.
That was the one problem I did have with, especially in the 5th edition, is when we talk about niches, is dark vision has been so overdone it makes humans almost a negative character to play, or you have to get a magic item to overcome this.
Yeah, as a DM, I just started playing up I think we talked about this in another one. I started playing up the nuance of dark vision and having it factor into the game. Like, you don't have as much detail as somebody with color vision or you know, an actual lighted, when there's a light source present. And believe it or not, now my parties, even with dark vision in them, are still walking around with lanterns, or if they can, a magic light source.
And I like that, actually. I just wish, when it was a continual light, where some of them where they could turn it, that was the problem, is once you get to 3rd level, I'll just cast continual light and I don't ever have to cast that spell again. What was the other?
That's an example of a 1st edition spell doing what too many 5th edition spells do nowadays.
I will be honest, though. Speaking of some of this, and I really hate. I know we're going to go on a tangent for this. Concentration for spells, which doesn't seem like a big deal until you get shape change, and you go, well, you understand that if you lose concentration and shape change, that spell completely dissipates. And what's the point of that one? that's one of those spells that I would much rather have the old D&D where it lasts a certain number of rounds, so you could cast multiple spells out there at the same time.
And isn't shape change quite a high level as well? It's
like 9th level or something like that.
So it should be one of those end game type spells. If it's 9th level, it's the same sort of level as Wish, for God's sake.
As I pull out my book here and look at it, whenever we do these discussions, and though I'm on an iPad, I'll pick my stuff up and go, okay, let me go wander off and pull this book off the shelf.
I do not have any of my stuff near me, so I'm always going off the cuff here.
So it is 9th level transmutation.
9th level.
Concentration up to 1 hour. And I would rather it just have a duration. In certain,
Yes. Yeah.
But those are, just like I think that's one of the problems that, and everyone talks about this. Oh, it's so cool to get this, and they say, well, most adventures only last 6 or 7 sessions, which I know some people get mad at. But I'm going. So that seems like enough. It's hard to get everyone together. It'd be nice if everyone could commit to things. But I also think those are the more fun levels too. It's when you're in that 5th through 9th level.
Yeah. In 5th edition, I like 3rd and 4th level in 5th edition, but that's pretty much the power equivalent of 5th through 7th level in older games, which was very much the sweet spot. And it was those were levels where you got all manner of great adventures.
So I guess looking at this, which are the most redundant classes, since we're talking about niche protection?
In which edition?
Any of them, whichever ones.
Well, in 5th edition, it's any class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I'm brutally honest, but and I would say probably the more specialized classes in 1st edition, because
I like the flavor of the specialized classes. I think they're an opportunity to.
I played a lot of them. I love the specialized classes. Don't get me wrong, but you don't need them.
No, you don't need. You're right. You don't.
Here's the problem that I had. We all played the specialized classes, which invalidated your core classes. And that's why I did like when they started doing the kits initially, that it's like, oh, okay, we don't have a thief and thief acrobat. You have a thief with a kit of acrobat. I liked some of those ideas in there. The Bard Blade Singer, which I enjoyed, but now 5th edition has gotten so far away from even talking about niche protection. Is
anybody can be a blade singer?
Well, I think they said that no, we're doing this. It was almost like they were apologizing, and I said, no, that's what should happen. Is there should be a dwarf, and these are his aspects, and this is his subclass. This is an elf, and this
put
is
the battle rager in there.
But if you make them the specific subclasses, I think that people would really gravitate towards certain ones of those, because that makes them unique and flavorful. And I know that Legion of Myth just hates, gnome paladins. Yeah, it stops making things special. I would rather, gnomes could only be this one subclass or something. And you go, oh, well, that's kind of cool.
Well, that's kind of what they had in AD&D, where they had the class restrictions.
Yes. And I brought them back to my 5th edition games. I don't allow the full gamut of classes for every race.
See, I can't bring myself to go that far, because even in AD&D that always bugged me. I never could. I know why mechanically they did it, because Gygax was trying to write a world where elves and gnomes and stuff were fantastical and therefore rare. But my brain, that's just one part of the suspension of disbelief I couldn't get around. I'm like, why can't an elf do this? Why can't a dwarf do this? Especially considering I know culturally dwarves are going to have gods, and so they're going to have clerics, and why can't dwarves do magic? Yeah.
I mean, one thing I liked about Unearthed Arcana is that it opened up the cleric class to more races, because you're right about that. All the races have their own gods, and I think the cleric should be a playable class for all races.
And it's especially great for dwarves, because other than battle axes, dwarves are known for hammers, so cleric is great.
Well, and that was one of the rules that we intentionally got wrong. We just said, we don't care, you can be a dwarven cleric, because dwarven thieves just didn't seem to make sense. So if
I was to go back and rewrite any of that, I would just write it as everybody can be anything, but certain races, just by the very nature of their attributes or whatever, are going to be better at things. Like I have to grump a bit, 5th edition in the whole, like, we don't want to say that all of a species are a certain way. I get that mentally speaking. Like, for example, like, intelligence is relatively intelligent, but they're if we could get rid of the use of the term race and start using species, I think we would have fewer problems, because face it, a dog and a coyote are very similar, but they're not the same.
Well, I'm going to bring up a little bit different. No one cared about race until the last 5 or 10 years.
Correct.
Well, you can't ignore it, though. I mean, it's there. So, I mean, something. That's the thing,
Well, here's the point: is that is people bringing their real world experience into the game, and that's the problem that we're having with it. Because I'll tell you this much: even in the 1980s, I much preferred race being in there, because, and I hate saying this, whether people like it or not, is because I looked at race as human race, which is what it was intended to be. It's the human race. Then you had the Neanderthal race. They were different species. That's the way it was used. But people want to equate modern, and I think that here's the real problem: is too many people are taking worthless degrees where they're throwing this down in their neck.
I'm sorry for having opened this can of worms. I apologize.
I'm sorry. This is my rant on here. Is too many people have done this, and they're bored and have nothing to do, instead of actually going out and improving their lives and worrying about everyone else out in the world. Like, you know what? Go out and go work out, go do something, go grow some vegetables off your balcony, and actually look at how wonderful this world can be, and then go look at other places in the world and seeing how bad they can be. But the whole point of getting into role-playing games is escapism. Well, let me rephrase it. That is to go into a fantasy world and bring your baggage from the real world into the fantasy world. That's fine if you're playing vampire. That's vampire. You go deal with them over there. But when you're playing D&D, you're playing the race is like human race.
Well, if you really want to get down to it, vampire's worse than D&D. That's the one thing I always loved about it. Like back in the 90s, everybody's like, "Oh, you play D&D? That's horrible." I'm like, "You're playing a game about a bunch of life-ending vampires and psychopathic werewolves and like degenerate wizards." And you're going to tell me that I'm playing some horrible game that's all ultra violence? I mean, last time I saw you guys play, you just drained a club full of people dry of blood.
But you know what? That was called World of Darkness. You play that for World of Darkness. It's like going to Cthulhu and saying, well, we have to be sensitive about mental insanity. That's the whole point of it.
I will say, here's the deal, though. Yeah. Those conversations, while valid in many, many spaces, I will not invalidate them. Far too much of my family is neatly tucked away in those aspects. It's only really prevalent in corners of the indie game scene and in around 5e, because 5e is the 400-pound gorilla, the mainstream RPG. Not a lot of that conversation is happening around Call of Cthulhu or the old school, except for where the old school prejudice spills over, like newer gamers going, old schoolers are a bunch of grumpy old racists.
All I can think is I didn't have enough players. Even if I was racist, I couldn't have enough players.
I have to, like, so I don't know. I'm going to try and phrase this. It's not good. It's not objectioning. It's nothing. We had a black player in my game back in the 80s, right? And he nowadays is still a player. He's still a cosplayer. He has an amazing drow cosplay. But what's funny is that, so back in the day, he was part of our group, and we just thought of him as part of our group, and we didn't care, and he didn't care. And what was
My
hilarious
experience
is,
is the same. My
what's
experience
hilarious
is the
is
same.
he ended up having the nickname of Black Sean.
Oh,
And what's hilarious is it was his nickname that he gave himself, because it wasn't because he was black. It's because everything he owned or wore was black. His coat was black. His shirts and shoes were black. His shotgun was black. The shells in his shotgun were black. Everything about him was black. We had another Sean in our group, which is why we had Black Sean, who was a total redhead, redheaded stepchild guy, and he was Red Sean. We had Red Sean, we had Black Sean, and it was wasn't meant as anything racist, and Sean himself didn't have a problem with it. Yeah.
well here's the other part of getting into this whole aspect of, whenever
Geek is probably like, please stop. But
no, I mean, it's mostly Twitter and these people who live on Twitter, which, to be fair, which is a lot of the WotC people. No one's really having these discussions around the table unless they want to bring it in. But most of the time, it was, oh, you're going to play in Oriental Adventures. You're going to play a samurai. The assumption is you're going to play a Japanese guy. It's just the assumption. I mean, why would, and I hate saying this, stupid Tom Cruise, I want to watch a samurai that's from Japan, not someone from the United States. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's, like I said, I'm not going to invalidate anybody's individual experience in gaming. Like I've a lot of the complaints, of course, of prejudice, whatever form, I've seen them in action. I know they exist. They've never existed at my table, but I've spoken with people who have had those problems. My wife is a gamer, and she's run into that problem back. She's been playing since high school in the late 80s, early 90s. And, she's faced that, oh, you must be here because your boyfriend is here, kind of a thing, right? And, I get it. I'm not going to invalidate. I just, it was never there at my table. It's not universal. It's, I when I was back in my AD&D days, I was active in 3 different gaming groups that were separated by cities. Of course, it's the Puget Sound, so it's, area, so it's all just one big sprawl, but, with lots of trees. But, they were neighborhood, far distant neighborhoods apart, 3 different groups. None of us had any hangups like that. There was one gaming group even that had a functionally illiterate player. He couldn't read the books or his character sheet. And that group because of course accessibility is another big touch point. The whole group, including us players who came in to play with that group, because what we would do is cross-pollinate with groups, right? I'll
Sure.
play in your campaign, you'll play in mine, like it was intended to be. And when you got there, this guy who was playing the dwarf, we all just helped him through. Roll this die.
As you do, yes.
Exactly.
As friends do.
As decent people do.
Well, I mean, just looking at what was going on for me, because I grew up around military, and most of the soldiers tend to marry. Well, numerous soldiers married Asian wives that they had when they were in Korea. I'm like, it doesn't matter. That's the whole point of when I listen to all these things. But when we talk about, this is just going to talk about classes coming in where they go back and forth, is the normal D&D is Western European.
Yes.
And Oriental Adventures is intended to be for the Eastern cultures, and that was the assumption. And I remember everyone, as soon as Oriental Adventures came out, we're all playing that.
What's interesting about Oriental Adventures, and one of the big complaints I hear about it, is the monoculture. How Oriental Adventures squeezed all of Asia into one monoculture, and to a degree that is true. In terms of the classes, were pulled from various cultures. However, the world itself, if you actually read like the short little gazetteer part in the back of the Oriental Adventures book, or get the Oriental Adventure, the Kara-Tur box set and the Oriental Adventures box set, it's much more culture specific, because you have Kara-Tur, and then you have Rokugan, and you had a bunch of other places. Rokugan was very much Japanese. And then Kara-Tur was very much supposed to be your Chinese section. And, so they had their analogs, Forgotten Realms. Funny thing is, Forgotten Realms is far less specific European-wise. Like, point
Yeah.
to me where Germany is in Forgotten Realms.
Well, even with Greyhawk, if you look at, and that's the problem, I think.
They
Well,
did
sometimes-
create fantasy things because they had like the Flenays and the blah blah blah, which are drawn off of whatever. But,
Sure. But I mean, when you look at it, to me, whatever they complain about any of these, they're all archetypes, and they're all taken from a big section, because we all know that Germans and Italians and French and Russians or Slavs are not all going to get together. We have histories of this.
and everybody
Yeah.
is played with an English accent.
Well, to be fair on this, is even when I hear the Germans, they still speak the British English. Though the Russians, when I went over there in the 90s, they spoke the American style of English. But no, I mean, this whole idea of I don't mind some of that. I would have liked to have seen some more, and I know Witcher does some of this, some more of the Slavic aspects.
There was a Kickstarter that was done recently. Unfortunately, I forgot the name. What that was, Eastern Europeans writing a Slavic, Eastern European-based fantasy RPG that I really wanted to grab, and I wish I could remember the name, because I'm like, oh yes, please. Like, I've mentioned it before. While it's not a disqualifier, I really appreciate authentic voice, like, being written from the region. There's a certain nuance that comes in there. I mean, yes, anybody can research a ton of stuff, but I feel like if I have somebody who does the same level of research and then is also Slavic and grown up in that culture, they're going to give me probably a more nuanced product than
A more authentic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I said, like authentic voice. Like if anybody wants to rewrite the Oriental Adventures setting and call it the Asian Adventures setting or whatever, because that if they want to be more modern with their terminology, I would appreciate it too if there were a bunch of Asians on staff, right, who were like experts in that stuff.
Well, I'm going to
believe
bring
them about the original Oriental Adventures. I believe there's some credited in the back.
Probably. I mean, I have a hard time thinking that like Ed Greenwood and crew would just go and say like, hey, because I think that's after they incorporated Karatur and made Oriental Adventures take place in the Forgotten Realms. But
I'm going to bring up one other point in here, which is they're all idealized mythologies. At no point, whether it was Maztica or what was the other one, Al-Qadim, you could tell that whoever wrote it, doesn't matter whether they were part of that culture or not, they loved what they were writing about.
Yes,
And there's a love in there, which you can tell it's in there. Oh, I love, and to be fair, I know several people that were Japan files, and they delved way deep down into there, knowing everything, and you go, okay, but as long as the person writing it is from a place of love of whatever the culture is, and I don't care if they butcher or not, because we're playing a fantasy world. They're all archetypes. Paladins were very specific. A lot of these things are very specific to where they are. I don't really care, but I do like it whenever they do the lore aspect, that they bring in someone that's been steeped in that culture, because there's a lot of cultural references that you just won't pick up.
Yeah, the pitfall there, and I think the reason that those two settings, like Al-Qadim and Oriental Adventures, are kind of not considered correct these days, is that a lot of the base assumptions that were built into those worlds are pulled from very Western romanticizations of those settings, and not from the internal romanticism of those settings. Like if you talk to somebody in Japan about samurai awesomeness, you're going to get a different point of view than an American who's only seen it through samurai flicks and the Western written treatises on samurai lore. Oddly enough, when I was in Japan, I found out that I knew a lot more about Japanese mythology than some of the Japanese people I was living with, because I'm a nerd, and I realized that I'm a nerd wherever I am, and most people don't care about nerd stuff. So I'm like, I remember we went to tour some samurai housing over in Shimane, in around Matsue, Matsue Castle down there, and so my host mom, who is a teacher, is taking me around this. They have a preserved samurai quarter outside the castle, and you can view it and stuff like that. And I pointed to the Japanese great bow, right? And I called it a daikyu. And she's like, no, Yumi, which is generic word for bow. I'm like, no, it's a daikyu. She's like, Yumi. And we're both right, but I know the archaic name for it, and she just knows its generic name because it doesn't matter to the average person. It'd be like me going, hey, look at that cool gun, and my friend next to me going, no, that's an AR-15. I don't care. It's a gun.
But I'll give you a good example, and I know we've completely gone off this. Is if you look at
I think we ran out of niche stuff.
Warhammer Fantasy versus the American D&D, and look at the completely different tone of it, because one is written by the English, of course,
who set their game in a German analog.
It's whatever we just like you said. It's all of them. It's romanticized. But except Warhammer Fantasy is much more the tongue in cheek and that it was very different from the aspect of just the way it's written. And
you can see a lot of that in 40K now too. I don't know how much about 40K you follow. Originally, it was all satire written by a bunch of British punks and bikers, who absolutely anti-establishment folks. And nowadays, people take it way too seriously. And the lore has been rewritten to be way too serious about itself. And a lot of the problems that people have is they're taking the satire as literal.
I had the original 40K Rogue Trader.
Yeah, that's how long I've been playing. I haven't played since 4th edition, but
I liked it because it was a small unit scale. And at the time, it was the only.
It's almost a role-playing game.
It is now. But I'm saying, but that role-playing game had to wait 25 years.
Well, no, Rogue Trader was originally written as a role-playing game.
Oh well, I read it. It was kind of one of those weird things that went and Warhammer Fantasy Battle, which I liked Warhammer Fantasy Battle for the writing, but that's what happens when you get guys that are taking history degrees and can't find a job. I
always found that the Warhammer world, for all of its high fantasy, was still really grounded because at the core of it, you had scungy Burgundians and downtrodden Holy Roman Empire, and
it's a much lower fantasy than D&D.
And when it has high fantasy elements, they're always off on the edges of the map. You have to go to like Ulthuan to get to the High Elves and all of their dragon riding Melnibonian ripoff goodness.
Well, and I think that was to sell the miniatures. I don't really get that as much from the world itself. One person has a drink. The other one is what was the other one that I was thinking of? Is if you look at Free League and how they do it, which is why I think they did Alien so well. I don't know what it is about the Swedes, but they seem to have a very dark sense of things.
Well, it's all that seasonal depression and from living in the north.
Can I just dive in, because we've had quite a few people just come into chat in the last 10, 15 minutes. Chat numbers have grown, and I just want to say to everyone who has come in, hello. We were talking about niche protection, and we've managed to stay on topic for about 2 hours and 15 minutes in this stream. But the last 30 minutes have wandered wildly off topic.
We're sorry. Blame it on the Americans.
we did cover the whole topic of niche protection pretty thoroughly for more than 2 hours. So,
if you really want to get down to it, I can bring it back.
Well, speaking of which, we're going to talk niche protection, since you now have the Conan book.
Right, which I haven't read yet.
And I know you don't like doing this. There is a character creator in the from Modiphius. If you type in Conan character creator RPG, they'll come up. And what I've really liked about that one is even when I roll randomly, I still get a character that's useful, and that's very unusual. Doesn't matter what you pick.
I've heard that about that. Yeah,
it's a very. Now, don't get me wrong. You can go whatever niche you want, and that's what I like about it. Is if I wanted to go, and what I mean by niche is what type of adventure do you want to have? And by doing that, you can really focus on there. Yes, you can go over and do, I want to be able to fight. And all characters at some point, if you play long enough, will have enough skills to be useful in multiple areas. But if you start picking observation, or you start picking the thief one, you can start picking skills that say, oh, I find secret doors, or I find this, or I do this. And it really adds a lot to it. And you can still learn sorcery without learning spells, which is what I like, along with languages. That's one of the reasons I really do like that system, is it doesn't seem to confine you, but it seems very easy to get a useful character out of the gate. And you can create a niche of wherever you want very quickly, even for fighters. Like, in D&D, generally bowmen and normal, there's not that much difference. But in there's a big difference between someone that's going to use a ranged combatant versus one that's going to go for a melee combatant versus one that's going to go over for a sneaky stab them in the back element.
That's cool.
I mean, I will be reading the Conan book very soon, but at the moment, I have a bit of a job on my hands. I'm planning on starting I've said before, I'm planning on starting a MERP game, which is starting to take shape a little in my Discord. Exactly when it starts, I don't know yet. And I said to the two players who've signed up definitively to join in. There's still plenty of spots for anyone who wants to go. I said to them, where do you want to play in the world? And I gave them a few choices, and they picked Arnor. And my Arnor book is 400 pages.
Speaking of which, what are the class niches for MERP?
Right. Okay. Now, MERP does have it's class and skill based. And the way it works is that every class has a number of points to spend on certain groups of skills. And warrior types have got more weapon skills, for example. Ranger types are good at the general skills, which are the outdoorsy ones. Rogue types are good at the subterfuge skills, and mage types are good at the magical skills. But the character creation system allows you to transfer points across, but at a cost. So it is perfectly possible to encroach on somebody else's niche. It's just very expensive to do so. So it's discouraged in that way. So what you will find there is that fighters, the warriors in the game, and to some extent the rangers, will accelerate away from all the other classes in terms of fighting ability. The scouts, which is the thief type class, will accelerate away from all the other classes in terms of subterfuge abilities. And that's what will typically happen, but it doesn't have to happen that way. It's simplified role master. I rather like MERP's character creation system in that you do have choices, but they are sort of guided choices, and the niches are preserved. But what does encroach in terms of niches is that every race has got certain default skills they start with, but in a way they do tend to guide the various races into relevant classes. But you can start off with a hobbit warrior, for example, who's going to be a lot better at stalking and hiding than almost any scout from a human race for quite a while. So that hobbit warrior may well encroach on that niche for quite some time, and probably will do for in their entire career. But most hobbits will be scouts, because that is the one that is the class that best suits them by a country mile.
And how many levels are? I mean, I have never played Rolemaster, and I only looked at MERP a little bit. I know you'd have to explain some of this, but like, what was the highest level that you ever got your characters to?
I was a forever DM at MERP, and I've not actually played as many sessions as I would like. So unfortunately, I'm talking second or third level because it's very lethal. And my current group, one reason we used MERP as a bit of a fill-in system, just as a change of pace. And they'd been playing 5th edition beforehand, and they came at MERP with the wrong attitude and got too many characters killed too quickly. That's one of the reasons why I want to run MERP with a different group who know more about the game through Discord, who will come in, I think, with the right sort of attitude where the characters have a chance of progressing. Because you have to play it with the mindset, almost the Cthulhu mindset, that combat is very, very deadly. And your
okay, go ahead. Sorry.
And your fighter types had better be willing to give up a bit of their mobility and their attacking ability to wear proper armor.
So it occurs to me that there's actually an example of skill-based system that still tries to manage niche protection.
Yes.
And that's the Cyberpunk game. I've been playing it since it came out, and haven't had a chance to play the new version. But it always seemed weird that they did it so you would have all your characters are built skill-based, but everybody has a role that gives them a special ability. Like you'd have a net runner or who would have net running, which always seemed weird. I'm like, that's just a skill, right? And then you'd have the solo who would have combat sense, which gave them an advantage on initiative in fighting. And then you'd have like a fixer who had like a networking ability where he could like find things. And it was always kind of an interesting way, because the game is like 99 point blah 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 percent skill based. You're just racking up skill points on 8 million skills to be a skilled character, kind of like Cthulhu, right? Where you have a wide variety of skills. But then they still then plaster this role, which is basically a class, and other classes, other roles couldn't get that ability, even though some of them, story-wise or practically speaking, seemed like things that you could get. For example, it seems like net running is something that somebody should be able to learn, right? It's just high-end hacking, right? And then some of them were even weirder because like the corporate and the cop roles in the game, their special ability was different types of authority within their organization. And I'm just thinking that's something that's accumulated by getting a day job and working your way up through the corporation, or going to police academy and becoming a law officer. But they still managed to find a way in this skill-based system to have niches that were very much guarded by arbitrary artificial game mechanic that didn't allow people to get those skills. I think in the latest edition, and there were some like house rules in the earlier editions that allow you to train in those as skills now, but it was always kind of a weird one that hey, here's these things that are really just learnable things, but only these guys can do them.
Have you, speaking a little bit differently, is I know for Alien they did it where I'm not even sure that's a niche per se, but you get those special talents that you can get only for that archetype.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's sort of a plastered on game mechanic niche. It is there specifically for the gameplay aspect, which I think going back to the very beginning of this episode and conversation, AD&D was all about that. Building characters that had specific niches in the game as game pieces within the game of Dungeons and Dragons.
And I think this is wrapping up the last little bit of niche protection, is it forces players to work together. And by forcing them to work together, you tend to get a more cohesive group. Now, that can fall apart if not everyone can show up. That's the big problem with it.
And I'll also say, like, in the case of like Cyberpunk, boy, did it not always make you work together, because we would always wonder, like, all right, how's the corporate guy supposed to be working into the party of edge runners who are out there on the street trying to fight the corporations, and why is this cop here?
And thus I feel the conversation has come completely full circle, because what you just said, Omanal, about niches forcing you to work as a group is pretty much how we open the entire conversation.
Yeah. I
think it's good from a game standpoint. It's not always so good from a group standpoint if everyone can't make it every week.
That's true, but isn't that what henchmen and hirelings should be for?
Oh, absolutely. Or you let them run as an NPC or something like that, which now that we're older, we're all agreeing that we should be running NPCs as retainers and everything else. But as kids, it was, no, we're going to do this.
All right, let me ask just flat out, like, simple answers. And I know I'm not the host of the channel, but just to bring it to a close.
Go ahead.
Overall thoughts, like summary, niche protection, good, bad. Is it good or is it bad?
For me, good.
It is good for wherever you're doing to allow players their moment to shine. For nothing else, most players, when they want to go through this, want to be heroic at some point. And because you have a niche, that allows you to do that. As long as the DM incorporates that in. I don't care if it's Call of Cthulhu or anything else. If he has that one chance where if you're the only guy that has the pilot skill, I can make it so you are necessary to get out of the desert from whatever. It's those aspects that really allow players to be individuals rather than just some numbers on a piece of paper.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's good too. I think not only is it good from allowing characters to shine aspect, which is a side tangent there. It's all the rage in modern how to run a good game videos on find moments for your character, for your players to shine. Meanwhile, the game system is really doing everything it can to make characters not shine. But I also feel that from a gameplay standpoint, niches speed up play and facilitate mechanically the play, because they really because you are giving everybody a role. There's not a lot of time spent debating who's going to do that. I mean, you've got your fighter, you've got your cleric, you've got your thief. They do things, and so when it comes down to a thing needing to be done, you're not spending a lot of time going, oh well, I have a better skill in this, and that, like in my current 5th edition game, my kid's character, who is the ranger of the party, is not the best at ranger skills in the party because of the way the skills work and the various backgrounds and things that people have. So again, the ranger is basically just sort of a semi-magical fighter, but then my wife's character is also a semi-magical fighter as a fighter. So anyways,
they're all treading on each other's toes, and
exactly.
It's the old thing. If everyone's special, nobody is.
Yup.
And the other part is, it is very easy to get someone in there to, well, we talk about classes, but classes are archetypes. This is the archetype you're going to play. And players that are new, that don't understand, say, oh, I'm the wizard. This is why I cast spells. I'm the fighter. I go out and fight. You can explain it, and it makes it very digestible. Whereas certain systems, especially when you have tons of skill points, players freeze up in paralysis, which helps that to, whether people like it or not, it makes it really easy to get the gateway game of, I can pull up a character in 5 minutes and play.
I think it's no surprise that video games, when they came out, started to mirror that early D&D experience with, where, Gauntlet is a good example. You've got 4 different characters in Gauntlet. Each one of them does a thing, and it really makes it easy to get into the game and just know what your character does, right?
And if you're playing the old arcade machine, where you had to feed in your money all the time, it was much better if there's 4 of you around there that you were all playing something different.
I missed half a day of school once because of that game. So my high school was built across the street from the mall. And when I was in 9th grade, and there was this is back in the days when we still had arcades, and so we went over on lunch to play Gauntlet at the arcade, and we get there, and there's 3 of us, and then there's this old dude there playing Gauntlet, and so he's like, we had a full party of 4. And we're playing it. We're just raging through that. We're enjoying it. And all of us run out of money and we're looking at our watches and he starts plugging quarters in for us. He's like, no, let's keep going, guys. Let's keep going. This dude we didn't even know. He's like probably 40 or whatever. You know, of course, back when you're in high school, he could have been 28, but he would have been 40, right? But, we played until we got so far into that game. And then we realized that time had passed. And we had to get back to school or we'd miss the bus. But this guy was just dumping quarters on 3 teenagers from over there. And all he wanted to do was just get as far as he could down into Gauntlet because he finally had a whole party. It was badass. I'm thinking back on it. The guy probably went home and played D&D that weekend because,
one of the original nerds.
Yeah, well, yeah, I had adult nerds in my life. That was awesome.
I didn't.
No, my parents just fed my addiction, but they didn't participate.
Yeah. Well, so we covered niches. We covered some other stuff.
We have, and it has just gone 12 o'clock where I am, midnight.
It's when Geek turns into a pumpkin.
Yes.
He turns into a responsible adult.
I turn into a sleeping lump.
Or a reasonable facsimile thereof.
I've got to get used to this staying up thing though, because Max has invited me on his Legion of Myth chill stream.
Oh,
and I have an opportunity to go on it. I think it's next week because my family are going on holiday towards the end of the week, and there's no problem with me staying up into the very early hours and keeping my wife awake. I'm not going to join them until a few days afterwards because I've still got to work. So I'm thinking, that Friday night I can stay up till 6 a.m. talking nonsense. But
now, just to warn you, because I stay up in Central Time, they still go up until 3 or 4 in the morning local.
I know. I've woken up on a Saturday morning. If I have to be up on a Saturday morning to go to work, I'm up at 7 o'clock, and I'll put the computer on, and they'll be talking away at that time. So, what I might do is I might get home from work and try and have a bit of a nap first, and set my alarm for 1:30 in the morning.
Do that, and then wake up and wake up early and then rejoin them, because usually those links are good. So you can start at the beginning, go to bed, and then wake up and do it again.
Possibly, yes. But we'll have to see. My stamina might run out on that trip. I really don't know, but I think it won't start until 2 hours later than it already is here. So, and yes, I'm beginning to nod a little. So. It is probably time for me to call it for this stream because I have got work in the morning.
Alrighty.
All right. Have a good night. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good night. It was fun again.
That's probably the most we've stayed on topic on any of these streams as well. So cheers, chat.
Especially for a very thin topic.
Exactly. And I want to say, Sax hasn't been with us for the last hour and a half. As always, he put in a lot of good stuff. And thanks, Elfbait, Omanal, to the two of you for joining me, and thank you everybody who's in chat, who has stayed to the end. There's still 15 people in chat, so I think it's always a shame to end the stream when chat's quite busy, but I have to go to bed.
All right. Well, have a good night.
All right, thank you all once again. It's been a good one again.